Well, good evening, everyone. I've got a couple of minutes after 6, so we'll go ahead and call our regular session of June 13, 2017 to order at this time. The first order of business that we have this evening is the opening prayer and the pledges of allegiance to the flags of the United States and the state of Texas, and Councilmember Gutierrez will lead us in the opening prayer.
Lord, we are meeting today to conduct matters of our community. Bless each person who took the time to gather here today, and let your hand of protection be on them and their families. Guide our hearts and our minds in spirit of fairness. Share a little of your wisdom with us to help us do right by all concerns. We seek your guidance, your courage, strength during our deliberation. Let the work done here tonight be coming to fruition, and let it be for your glory. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you, Mr. Gutierrez. Next item of business we have this evening, we have announcements of upcoming city events, and Ms. Gonzalez, you have that this evening. Very good.
Yes, good evening. So the first item on the list here is on Thursday, June 15th, the last of the pre-budget community meetings. It will be at 6:30 p.m., and it will be at the Schertz United Methodist Church. On Tuesday, June 20th, is the Chamber Luncheon at 11:30 over at the Civic Center. On Saturday, June 24th, there's a couple of events going on. First is the tee-off for the library at 10 o'clock in the morning, and that will be at the Schertz Library. And then also over at the Civic Center, the Chamber is having their Home Living Showcase. That's from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. On the 27th of June, we will have a City Council meeting at 6:30 p.m. On Friday, June 30th, is the TML Legislative Wrap-Up from 7:45 to 2:30. And if you are interested in going, please contact Brenda or Donna. It will be held in Austin. And then upcoming on Tuesday, July 4th, is our 42nd annual 4th of July Jubilee, and down in Pickerel Park. And for more information, you can go to visitschertz.com, and it'll have the updated information as we post it. And then also new this year, our Parks and Recreation Department is doing a Coolest Seat in the House, and it's going to be at Pickerel Park Pool on July 4th from 6 to 10 p.m. And tickets will be sold in advance, $3 a person, a maximum of 150 people. So if you are interested in going and hanging out in the pool and watching the fireworks, please visit the Parks Department to purchase your tickets.
All right, thank you. Mr. Kessel tells me he doesn't have anything to add for the next item that we have, so we're going to move on to a proclamation recognizing the GenCure Marrow Donor Program. And I'm going to turn over the floor to Mr. Larson, and he's going to read this proclamation this evening.
So thank you to the mayor. He helped put this together, and I have Beth and John here from GenCure. I'm sorry, Ken. Oh, I apologize. I'm nervous. I don't usually get nervous in front of a microphone, but this is something that's really dear to my heart, and so I actually didn't even know this existed until a few weeks ago. They came to our church, and we did a drive. Somebody in our church body is sick and in need of a marrow transplant, and I learned a lot. Anything I say that's incorrect, they will correct me afterwards. But for me, the reason this is important is because if this awareness proclamation matches one donor to somebody in need, it'll be the most important thing I will ever do on city council. And I imagined, when I was at church, I imagined a father sitting bedside to a daughter who's desperately in need of a marrow transplant, and nobody in his family is a match. And I could see if that was me going door to door begging people to try to be a match. And there's this feeling of hopelessness that father would have, knowing that there could be somebody who could bring hope, but they just can't find them. And the reverse is true of a young daughter whose mother is sick. And she doesn't understand. She just knows that maybe one day a match will hit. And so when I learned about this program and how I signed up for it, I joined the registry, and it took less than 10 minutes. It was painless. Anyways, it meant a lot to me, because that feeling of hopelessness and to bring hope into that situation and to have the power to do that with such a small effort is very meaningful to me. And so I better be quiet before I go on too long, and I'll read the proclamation, and I'll turn the microphone over. Whereas, for individuals diagnosed with leukemia, lymphoma, and other life-threatening blood diseases, a bone marrow, stem cell, or cord blood transplant may be their best or only hope for a cure. And whereas 70% of patients who need a transplant do not have a fully matched donor in their family, and whereas individuals between the ages of 18 and 44 can join a bone marrow donor registry, and whereas the GenCure Marrow Donor Program, in partnership with Be the Match, hosts registration drives and special events to promote awareness about the urgent need for more potential donors, and whereas the program coordinates donor registration, marrow donation, and search activities providing donor suitability, management, collection, and processing of peripheral blood stem cells from adult donors. And now, therefore, I, Scott Larson, on behalf of Michael Carpenter, Mayor of City of Schertz, do hereby declare June 2017 as GenCure Marrow Donor Program Awareness Month, and hereby give additional support to the efforts of the people living and working in Schertz, Texas, and the Metro San Antonio area who dedicate and volunteer themselves to this worthy cause. If you're here and you are part of an organization that could help host a drive, maybe you're the city manager of a city with about 300 employees in a confined area, or part of the chamber, and you could host a drive, I urge you to speak to these people, and with that, I'd like to give it a...
I'm actually not going to talk too long, because Ken is actually a survivor, a marrow survivor. So that's why I asked him and his family to come in tonight. With the registry, guys, we just happened to meet at a church for another fellow church member that happened to be, him and his wife happened to be registering and just happened to be there at the right place at the right time. What's really neat about what we do is 80% of the time now, guys, we can collect stem cells through a blood donation. It's called apheresis. So it's very similar to giving platelets or plasma. And a lot of folks don't know that. They think it's this surgery that we have to dig into your bone and, and do all this craziness. Well, maybe many, many years ago, technology has come a long way in how we're actually able to save blood cancer patients. And so I don't want to talk too long, because I'd really like Ken to just speak and tell just a few words to you guys. But yes, if you could get in touch with Scott, and if you would like to host a marrow drive, and actually, I wanted to thank you guys so much, because of what you did, the YMCA here, next door, across from Clemens, has actually, we're a military family, so we're sort of new here, so I'm getting my bearings. They are actually doing their first drive for the City of Schertz Marrow Donor Month in honor of this. So I have more information that I can get to you, but we'll make sure that gets out on the YMCA's webpage for you guys to be able to come. And it is in honor of Aaron Brady, who is actively searching for a transplant. But with that said, I'd like Ken to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you all for your time and for this proclamation. You talked about, can you imagine being that father and looking at your kids and saying to yourself, what would you do? I didn't have to imagine, because I have two boys back there. And when I was diagnosed with aplastic anemia, and that search went out on the registry to find somebody, I knew what my motivation was. I didn't know about the registry either until I needed a match. And my hope for all of you is that never happens. I hope you're all educated on the registry, and that you follow through with looking into it and considering whether you want to be someone's cure. But if you're not, if that's not you, then just let other people know about it, because ignorance is the biggest killer. I think we can all agree there. And just letting people know that the marrow registry exists, and that somebody sitting here, a neighbor, a friend, a relative, could possibly be someone's cure, it's life-changing. I'll never forget what my donor told me. He said someday he wants to have kids, someday he's going to get married, but what he got to do for me is probably the most important thing he'll ever do in his life. And this is coming from a man in his mid-20s. So thank you again for your time. Thank you to the council and to the mayor for doing this. And I appreciate everything. Thanks.
Very good. Fantastic. It's our pleasure. My Aunt Donna's awaiting a match right now. She needs a bone marrow transplant to survive. I understand. Thank you. All right, the next item we have on the agenda this evening, we have a presentation regarding the recent City of Schertz, Texas Association of Municipal Information Officers, or TAMIO Awards. Mrs. Gonzalez and Ms. Klepper.
Okay. Oh, it's throwing me off. It's on the sides. Okay. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight we are here to present to you a few awards that the Public Affairs Office, as well as a lot of other teams, have earned through the Texas Association of Municipal Information Officers. So the first award is the Award of Honor for the Schertz magazine, which is our print newsletter, in the category external print newsletter under 60,000 in population. So everybody's familiar with our Schertz magazine. Of course, it is our monthly popular lifestyle community events publication that is produced internally through our Public Affairs Office. The second award is the Award of Excellence, which is most creative with least dollars was the category that we won for. And this is for Trunk or Treat. So started in the early 2000s by Schertz Fire Department as an alternative for neighborhood trick-or-treating. Trunk or Treat has since evolved into a collaborative community event. And in 2016, city departments, the Schertz YMCA, local businesses, and other nonprofits came together to provide a family-friendly, spectacular event for the community. So prior to this joint effort, many different organizations were kind of hosting their own type of event, and instead we all came together and provided one big community event with a huge turnout, about 3,000, 4,000 people in the park, and just a lot of fun for the kids, a lot of fun for the volunteers and the organizations who were participating. So that was most creative with least dollars, under 120,000 population. The next award is the Award of Excellence for Internal Communications. This was for under 100,000 in population. So our Schertz Strong Health and Wellness Program was created in 2013 to help employees eat healthy, feel healthy, and be healthy. When we launched this program, Schertz Strong surveyed city employees and found that education, fitness, and maintenance programs were rated among the highest interest for employees. And incorporating those interests and other research that's been produced from the survey, we've been able to keep city employees engaged and participating over the last 4 years. And so this one won for internal communications. The TAMI Awards, these two awards are the top awards for the category. So for Best Use of Photography, the February 2017 issue of Schertz magazine features a local high school alumni swimmer doing laps in the newly completed Schertz Aquatic Center. This swimmer represents the hard work and efforts of many community stakeholders who rallied together in support of this quality of life facility, which was approved in the 2010 bond election. And this one was not broken up by population, and so we did beat out Austin and Frisco in this category. Best flyer and poster under 70,000. This one was created by Ms. Melissa Gateman. The design of the flyer was influenced by traditional components of Halloween while keeping it family friendly. It's the many spooky elements of the flyer that make it unique and imaginative by adding small details such as the illuminating glow of the pumpkin and creating texture on the moon, the silhouette of the eerie tree, and the distressed texture of the orange background. The perfect Halloween mood was captured. So this one won for Best Flyer and Poster. We went to the TAMIO conference last week, and we were awarded these awards. We entered into 9 categories, and we placed in 5, and we took first in 2. And so very proud of the team and very proud of all of the departments involved, Parks and Recreation, the Fire Department, YMCA, as well with Schertz Strong, HR, and many individuals from various departments that make up that committee to execute those events on a yearly basis. So a huge group effort. We were just the ones that entered the categories and accepted the awards on behalf of those individuals. So.
Very well done. That's very well done. The fact that we, so at least one of them, 2 of them, right, were regardless of the size of the city.
Yes.
And in those categories, we were first in the state of Texas.
Yeah.
Very well done. Thank you for that work. That's exceptional. Mr. Edwards, you were saying?
It's actually very impressive. Very.
It is. We have the magazine is always well received, but now you're adding to that. It's fantastic work. Thank you very much. It really makes the city look good. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And then if we could get some representatives from the departments to take a photo with the awards, Jessica.
Good.
It's out of the. Let me do one more. Ready? You want to check this? Yeah.
Mr. Edwards pointed out a minute ago that we've come a long way with the Schertz magazine. When I was first running for city council, it was a few pages, and if I recall, they were still stapled. And we may have print on both sides, may have been, and it was this sort of manila-looking paper with black print, and we ran off copies to give them out to everybody. Come a long way. Again, work very well done. Thank you. All right. The next item I have on the agenda this evening is the hearing of residents, and I believe first signed up this evening is John Chalker. If I mispronounce your name, please tell me. Perfect. Well, if you would, when you come forth, give us your name and address for the record so the city secretary can capture that for the minutes.
Good
Thanks.
evening, Mr. Mayor and council members.
Evening.
John Chalker, I'm a resident for 10 years in Schertz. I love the town, love our city. It's awesome, growing. I'm a business owner. I'm an ISA certified arborist, and I have a tree service local here. I've worked with the city a few times on some projects, and I appreciate all y'all's work and all that y'all do for us. And I would like to address, I've looked at our recycling, and we do a whole bunch of different things, aluminum and plastic and glass and different things, but there's no wood waste recycling program at the moment. And I would like to propose if there would be a place to put or take debris for residents to bring my company has a machine that can recycle and make wood chips, and I would be glad to put that on a site if it was made available to take in Christmas trees and brush and bushes and things that residents can bring when don't have a place to take it. And they can bring it in at no charge, come out the other side of the machine with mulch. So that's my little proposal. I'm not a good public speaker, but
Doing pretty good with me.
But I'll tell you what, everyone around us is doing it. Comal's doing it. And when they contract it out, and they're spending a whole lot of money. But it's a big county, and they got a lot of debris coming in. We're smaller, much. But I think it's a great thing if we're recycling in all those areas. Green waste is great for the environment, great for our plant material and all of our, beds and plant, everything, and that material that's brought in can be made available to the residents at no cost.
All right.
Pretty good offer, I think. Just y'all talk about that and see if y'all might have some place in Schertz that you would consider putting, making a place available for residents to bring waste that can be taken out the other side as good material. Any questions?
So what we'll do is we'll have one of our staff, probably Mr. Waite or one of his employees, contact you and just visit and try to understand it, maybe go look at the equipment and
Sure.
start a conversation.
And I know y'all do chip brush for residents currently, but where it goes from there,
Yep.
don't know.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. 289 Maskey Road? Perfect. If you would, give your phone number where you can contact you to the city secretary. Very good. Thank you. Next on the list, looks like Trey Womack.
Trey Womack, 8519 Tuscan Hills, Garden Ridge, Texas. Thank you, Mayor, Council.
You bet.
I wanted to come in and voice my concerns about the planned thoroughfare. I've been to a lot of the planning and zoning meetings and many of the council meetings over the last year. And I've talked to Brian, I've talked to Kathy, and I know that the first reading, I guess, is at the end of June for the council. And I came to the meeting and I heard all the concerns of the people on the south side talking about 3009 and all the other roads there. And I'm not naive, I understand there is need for some roads. But I'm up on the north side, closer to 35. And my concerns are that a lot of the planned thoroughfares lock the land up for such a long period of time. I have some property on 35. There's other neighbors that have property on 35. I've done, I was the one that saved my nickels and pennies and bought this piece of land 14 years ago, And now to have someone come in and say, well, we're planning on putting a road through here or a planned thoroughfare through here, but yet no one can tell me a time, whether it's going to be 5 years, 10 years, 15, or even 20 years down the road. It's not really fair to some people that have saved for things to, for their retirement. I do understand there are going to be roads going through there, but I think that someone needs to come up with, when y'all have this meeting, and I understand part of the planned thoroughfare plan is also for a way to pay for the roads, which is something different, the impact fees. I've been around when Door Lane was widened. That was many, many years ago. There was no impact fee then. Nobody paid for Lookout Road. And I understand that on some of these properties, you're going to want the developer to come in and pay for these roads. Well, I'm sort of concerned of how this is coming up now and what's going to happen on some of the development. Some of the road gets developed because of someone going in with something closer to 35. Well, what about the rest of it that goes from down Old Wiederstein or whatever from 1103? Who pays for the rest of it? So I just wanted to voice my concerns, and maybe I can get some answers in between now and the time for the next reading. Okay? Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, sir. All right, next up, Maggie Titterington. Maggie?
Good evening, Council. I wanted to get my thoughts all coherent, so I wrote it down to read to you. This is also addressing the agenda item about the local flavor workshop that you're going to speak and discuss. I want to thank Kyle for the time he has spent getting the Chamber's input, as well as some of our member businesses, on the proposed local flavor incentive policy, which encourages and supports small businesses in Schertz. Understanding the inability of the SEDC to commit to a program that helps our particular area of small businesses, which are termed quality of life, is due to the constraints of the Texas Local Government Code, I appealed to the City Council, who can, however, consider this policy and its adoption through the city's general fund. We are talking about businesses that have chosen to plant in Schertz, whose owners most likely live in Schertz, pay taxes in Schertz, and have their employees from Schertz. This incentive is encouragement and support from the city they have chosen to do business in and goes such a long way with a small business owner. Consider that an amount varying from $1,000 to $5,000, which could be used to expand their taxable footprint, income, and more quality of life services to better serve more of our community residents. This is something to be considered and pursued. During my presentation last year to the SEDC, one of the board directors felt that, in their opinion, small businesses appreciate a helping hand, sometimes even more so than the bigger businesses who get hundreds of thousands of dollars. Many times large corporations have an attitude of, "Is that it?" whereas the small businessman or woman feels appreciated, encouraged, validated in their choice of city for doing business, and that city truly cares about their presence and success. There's much to be said for quality of life businesses and how they are an integral part of keeping our residents happy and their money spent locally, but to encourage more growth of those already successful businesses not only serves our residents, but also allows those outside of our area new money to come in and be spent here as well. If we cannot service those in our area to the best of our ability, we certainly will not encourage those outside to come into us and spend. If we did not have these quality of life businesses in our area and were confined to only those businesses that the Texas Code applies to, I do not think our residents would be very pleased, nor would Schertz continue to get the high ratings of being one of the best places to live. I have suggested and spoken to Kyle, as well as submitted to him, a few proposals of what this program could look like. The setup: it's only done once a year, award a minimum of $1,000 and a maximum of $5,000, and that the total granting monies do not exceed $30,000 in the inaugural year or any year after that, unless the City Council feels it's appropriate. Once awarded, a business cannot apply for it again. My suggestion also about the conflict with City Council making decisions or actually judging the applications, my suggestion is perhaps the Committee of Committees, which is it's a volunteer board and has nothing to do with the city government. Suggested criteria would be a minimum of 3 years in business, copy of taxes paid to the City of Schertz in the prior year, essay on how the project will increase taxable services and provide estimated value in print, estimate of what those future monies may be, a list of 3 or more areas of community involvement in the past year that the applying business has participated in, and a reference from a partner in each of those, and that business must first put up 50% of the initial project cost. Last, I would like to finish with a statement from a longtime Schertz business and a chamber member who is unable to be here tonight. She dubbed the local flavor incentive, for whatever reason, the buy-in program. She says, "I believe in the buy-in program. If KDJ Insurance Agency supports this community, then the community will support KDJ Insurance. Since we have been in business for over 30 years, this must be true. Now, to take the buy-in program to the next level, if the City of Schertz will buy into the small businesses, then we all win. We all know that small businesses have very limited funds for improvements, equipment, and overall various needs. Even the improvements for the parking lot, AC or roof repairs can be out of reach for small business. The money is going to be greatly appreciated at any amount. Just the idea that my city will invest in my dreams is priceless. It is hard to express the feeling that you know you cannot fail if your city, your community supports you. It's not the dollar amount, but the support and confidence that you know you are part of a community that cares about small business. Shop and support locally owned business, and we all succeed." Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next on the list is Tanya Samis.
Good evening. I'm here to speak once again on behalf of the Local Flavors Workshop, and I thank you for listening to me last time, and I just want to speak as one of those small business owners about what Maggie was talking about, and just share how helpful something like this would be. As many of us know, and I'm speaking on behalf of the small business owners, not only in the chamber but across the city, owning a business is definitely a roller coaster ride. It provides for a lot of struggles and challenges. There are also many triumphs and successes that we're able to celebrate. And I think being able to do that in a community that's supporting those small businesses and giving back to them is really important. I mentioned this last time, but Joby and I, when we moved CrossFit Barillas into Schertz, we also moved our home here. Every time someone walks into our gym, we're so excited to be able to serve this local community because we know that as they receive value from us, they will take that value back into the community. So being able to have what Maggie said may be a small amount in terms of larger corporations, that would mean the world to us because then as a small business owner, we're able to put more equipment into our gym, create signage that will bring more people to who we are and what we're doing, and just really be able to make and have an impact. And of course, it will be able to impact the city on the flip side because all of the people who are participating and being a part of our services will then be able to take that value into the streets of Schertz. I just really want to resonate the fact that it would mean so much to have the support and the encouragement and the consideration to be able to receive things like this, not only specifically for my business, but for any small business owner here in the area so that we can continue to grow a city that I see so much potential in every single day. And thank you for your time.
Very good. Thank you.
Mr.
Sir?
Could we possibly get a copy of Mrs. Titterington's report?
I beg pardon?
Could we get a copy of the report that Maggie Titterington gave?
Sure. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, I didn't have anyone else sign up this evening, so with the indulgence of council, I'm going to move to the items that we have with our friends from the Schertz Seguin Local Government Corporation. I think some of the folks that are here may have a bit of a drive back to the Seguin area or elsewhere. So that will take us to item number 8. So let's start there if we can. Item number 8 is Resolution 17R34, a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing the Schertz Seguin Local Government Corporation, or SSLGC, budget amendment for fiscal year 2016-2017 in the amount of $1 million as a transfer to the SSLGC Repair and Replacement Fund and other matters in connection therewith. Mr. Waite?
Mayor and members of council, I'd like to introduce Ms. Amber Briggs-Beard. I'm the Assistant General Manager of SSLGC to present this as well as the following 2 items.
Very good.
Hello, good evening. I am Amber Briggs-Beard, the Assistant General Manager of the Schertz Seguin Local Government Corporation. I'll start off with Resolution 17R34. This is authorizing the SSLGC budget amendment for fiscal year 2016-2017 in the amount of $1 million to transfer to the Repair and Replacement Fund. This was approved by our Board of Directors on May 18, 2017, and this is due to our retained earnings policy that we currently have. And I can answer any questions that you have.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Council, questions?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we approve resolution number 17R34.
Second.
I have a motion from Mr. Edwards, a second from Mr. Thompson. Any other comments or questions from council? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 7 ayes, no nays. The motion carries and is so ordered. Item number 9 is Resolution 17R35, a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, approving the Schertz Seguin Local Government Corporation fiscal year 2017-2018 annual budget and other matters in connection therewith.
This has been approved on May 18, 2017 by the Schertz Seguin Local Government Corporation Board of Directors for an overall budget amount of $8,942,388. I believe a copy of our budget was included in your packets, and I can answer any questions that you may have about that.
Council, any questions? Is there a motion to approve?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to approve resolution number 17R35.
Second.
My right ear caught that first, so I have a motion from Mr. Edwards, a second from Mr. Gutierrez. Any other comments or questions from council? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 7 ayes and no nays. Motion carries and is so ordered. Item number 10, Resolution 17R36, a resolution by the City Council of City of Schertz, Texas, approving the Schertz Local Government Corporation fiscal year 2017-2018 water rates and other matters in connection therewith.
So Schertz Local Government Corporation contracts with Will Dan, economist.com, with Dan Jackson, and the Board of Directors voted on this on May 18th, 2017. This does include a 1 cent rate increase of our O&M budget from 87 cents up to 88 cents for FY 2018. So the water rate for Schertz and Seguin overall would be $1.61 per 1,000 gallons.
Okay. Council, any questions on this one?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we approve Resolution 17R36.
Second.
I have a motion from Mr. Edwards, a second from Mr. Thompson. Any other comments or questions from council? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 7 ayes, no nays. The motion carries and is so ordered. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Very good. All right. Let me come back around to our workshop items. We have 2 workshop items today. The first one is discussion or action regarding providing a proper name to the heretofore no-name city park on Schertz Parkway. And without getting too much into the history of who was maintaining that piece of property, who thought who owned it, which was an interesting set of circumstances, come to find out in the end that is, in fact, land that is owned by the city of Schertz, and is now basically an unnamed park space within the city. So I would like to ask the council if the council would consider requesting that the Parks Board consider naming this Earl Sawyer Park. Mayor Sawyer was the mayor prior to Hal Baldwin, and Mayor Sawyer was tireless in his efforts and is in working to get Schertz Parkway finished out where it is now. And I don't know that we've done anything here in the city to honor Mayor Sawyer. So if it's okay with the council, and I guess easily enough, we could. It is on for action. So from the chair, and we may want to discuss this from the chair, though, I'd like to move that the council request that the Parks Board consider naming that park Earl Sawyer Park.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Why can't we just name it Earl Sawyer Park?
Well, we could,
Council.
and the reason that I'm asking us to ask the Parks Board is that it's usually the purview of the Parks Board to come up with names for parks, and I would much rather us request that they consider it than just taking the action on our own. If there are any objections, if there are any challenges, or if they already had an idea, I'd love for them to have the opportunity to speak on it first. So I thought I'd put that out there.
I'll second your motion.
All right, I have a motion and a second to request the Parks Board to consider naming the currently named no-name city park to Earl Sawyer Park. Any other comments or questions from council? Mr. Crawford.
I don't have any problem necessarily, but do the city residents have any input in doing those kind of things, or is contest or anything like that we do?
I think what we do is we have the Parks Board, which is made up of appointed residents, and we've kind of delegated that work to that group of residents.
Thank you.
You bet. Anyone else? I do have a motion and a second. I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 7-0, the motion carries and is so ordered. Thank you, council. I really appreciate that, and see what the Parks Board thinks of our suggestion. All right, next item I have this evening is our second workshop. It's a discussion and update regarding the local flavor incentive policy, and I see this is Mr. Kennetetter will have this one.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I have Drew here with me, who's going to help with the presentation as we get to a piece a little bit later on during the presentation.
You just recently brought Drew on board, right? How long has he been with us?
Three
weeks, and you're putting him in the front of the podium.
Drew hit the ground running. We are very busy and delighted to have him, and he's come up to speed really quick, so it's great. As you'll be able to see, it's been great.
Got to be careful. If you get past 4 weeks, you tend to stay here for 20 or 30 years.
So Drew gets to press enter.
All right.
He'll move it because last time I had so much problems with the computer. So one, I wanted to start off. Last time we were here, as we were discussing our incentive policy, we had proposed separating our incentive policy into two different pieces. We had the economic development policy, which was very much our traditional policy. The second one, based on things that we had heard from the council and also from the community, we wanted to go out and to evaluate a local flavor policy. The idea here being that this focuses on our small businesses and our entrepreneurial community here in Schertz. Some of the things that we've heard at council, both tonight and in previous weeks, small businesses are very important to a local economy, and it's tough. I come from a background of small business owners, and it is a challenge. There are a lot of benefits that come by our entrepreneurs and small businesses within our community, and something to definitely keep in mind. It has also been brought up that we were not able to incorporate this under the other policies through the economic development because we're restricted in a couple of different ways, but the main being a primary jobs requirement, which gets into specific types of businesses which we feel are outside of those that we're generating or classifying as the local flavor policy. And so one, with that as an overview, we really are here seeking direction from you as the council, and we'll go from there. So one, as staff looked at this issue, we wanted to take a step back and to look at best practices and what other communities are doing and what where have others found success, and what really is our role. So first, I start off. I have here EDO stands for Economic Development Organizations. One of the things that I'll highlight is that economic development, there are several different players, right? Within the city of Schertz, you have the EDC is a portion of it. Council, you guys play a pivotal role. Lisa and the development team. We have Maggie and the chamber, and we have other chambers. We have trade organizations that work in this area. We have state programs that are at work in this area, and so there's a lot of different players that are working all for entrepreneurship and for small business. So I'm going to lay out all of these 5 points as they really are the key areas where these EDO organizations participate with entrepreneurship and small business. So the first one being through technical assistance. One of the things that we see with small businesses is they are operating a lot of times, we hear the word bootstrapped. I mean, they're doing everything that they can to go out and to live their dream and to pursue their business. And a lot of times they don't know, they don't have the experience, they don't have all the tools. And so economic development organizations can help to provide those technical assistance and provide information. One of the other challenges is financing, and access to capital. We have traditional financing and there's debt financing and equity financing, and ultimately they need money to run a business, and so that's another area. There are ways that economic development organizations can help eliminate and remove some of those barriers to entry and make it easier. Some communities, they'll go out and they'll start up incubators. They'll start up resources to help small businesses and entrepreneurs get established. Some EDOs participate through infrastructure. As if you have a system that's developed, the burden, as we've heard tonight, of putting in a large road, if that's in place, now it becomes easier for a small business to go in and set up shop, as it lowers those costs. And then, assistance, I've put here permitting, zoning, but any regulatory framework, again, these business owners, they're a lot of times just starting off, or they're smaller and they need help and assistance. And so there are, one of the ways is that people provide assistance through, helping overcome some of these regulatory areas. So as staff looked at these issues, one of the things that we realized is that we hadn't really asked the entire, business community. We've heard from some of them here. In interactions, we interact with some of them. And so, one, realizing that we wanted to hit the ground running and to move forward. We didn't have time to, do a lot of things, but we did go out and target some specific, we'll call them local flavor type of businesses that are along Schertz Parkway, that are along Main Street, along 78, and also 3009, and took just a straw poll survey, not a statistically significant survey, but something that would allow staff to really get a good input and feel of those areas where we felt our efforts would be of most help. We heard everything. We heard from businesses that were brand new and just starting off, and they didn't know where to turn, and they needed information. There were some that we talked to that literally said, if we would have known that you guys could have helped us with that information, you would have saved us tons of time and headache, and I'm sure lost revenue and helped them in their business. We heard the struggles that small businesses go through as they access capital. We heard the stories about how they go to their family in financing these, and how some people have mortgaged their properties, and some others literally have no other way of accessing capital. And so I'll say we kind of experienced it all. We also experienced other people that they're not having challenges with financing. They've been able to go out and access traditional means. We heard about a lot of the regulations and things that we have in place that limit their ability, and a lot of those are not at the city level, and so we're not, we don't have control over those. However, there may be some people or other organizations that do partner in some of those areas that we could put them in contact with. And then from some others, we realized that a lot of these small businesses and entrepreneurs going through the city process and going through the state process is brand new to them, and they don't know where to turn and where to go to. And so we really kind of heard everything. We did not have strong support in going out and in starting, up a new program or a grant program, or we didn't hear overwhelming. We didn't hear one area of need that kind of raised to the top. It was just a lot of these common challenges that we experience with small businesses and entrepreneurs. So the next thing that I wanted to do, as part of the EDC plan, we proposed an assistance center, and the idea here is that there is a lot of information that we have, and if we can put it out on our website, that's available. It's available to everybody, right? It's the nice thing about the internet. And so even though our focus is on those businesses that will be starting primary jobs and the mission of the SCDC, these are resources that are available to everybody. And so this is where I'm going to pull up Drew and have Drew take us through. I'm going to have Drew take us through our proposed assistance center that we've put together. So this will be available on the Schertz EDC website. And again, think of this as a 50,000-foot level of place to go get help. This is something that we can use within the city, within our chambers of, hey, there's a resource available in Schertz. Go to this website. As somebody goes to our front window at one of our, to turn in a permit, this is a resource that they could say, well, hey, you're starting a business. Hey, this is an opportunity. You may be able to find something that you need here. And so really this is an inventory of, those high-level items that we see that people need the most. And so, one, want to make sure that council knows that this resource is very close to being finished. There's a couple of tweaks that I'll mention as we go through it. So the first thing is market data. So as we go through, people need general demographic information and, to know who's here and what our economy looks like. As we look at this market reports, we pay for a tool which allows us internally to go through and to research, what are those demographics within our community and what industry should we go after? And, as we go to these retail shows, we use this information to help sell our community. Small businesses and entrepreneurs can use this to help build around their business plan. Utilities, very complicated. Who are the players? Where do we go to? And then understanding the taxes. And so again, it's a series of information that people can go to very quickly. As we go to the next section, people come to us and they ask, well, hey, I want to start up a business. Where can I go? We looked at doing an available properties and managing it in-house. It's not feasible. So one, we're going to partner with an organization called Xceligent, where any property can be listed. It will be managed by a third-party source. This is one that we use on a daily basis to keep up to date with properties that are available, but then also in researching the market. So this will be a resource, and this is one of the pieces that's not live. It will take a little bit as we work out with their team and ours. But they'll be able to go through and see immediately all of the properties that are listed. Or if you had a property owner that had a property and they wanted to have it listed, there's a way that they could add this for free. And so here's a resource that just helps people. Let's go to the next one. Development assistance, again, keeping a very high level of what is our process in Schertz. And then as you go into each of these links, it will send you back to the city's website of each of those individual areas and where they can get help. If we go up to the top, one of the things that we're highlighting is this is a complicated process and that they want to work with their architect or engineer, but this helps them understand that process as they go through. Next one. Then the last piece, realizing that the Schertz EDC, we can't do everything, and we do have a specific mission. So we realize that partnerships help make us stronger, and so there are organizations like the chambers and different trade organizations that provide services that we don't. I mean, these are specialties that they know more about workforce, for instance, that our staff is not the best resource for. And so this is a resource that really allows them to go and they know where they can get in contact. So you see that for workforce, small business and entrepreneurship, if it's somebody putting together a business plan, or going to the next section, somebody who wants help in doing international business and exporting. These are resources for them. Thanks, Drew. So again, as we go back, one, wanted to make you aware of some of those tools that are currently in place that we have available that will go live very shortly, that are out there as a way to help all businesses, realizing that if we can help businesses get up and operational without giving away money, that's our best case scenario. As a city, we can go use that money elsewhere. We have discussed, though, a specific program, and so this is really where I come and I'm asking for the most guidance as we move forward of areas where the council, where you would like to have staff focus their energy. A couple of options, I'm going to put them all up here. So grants are an opportunity that, well, so first in macking up, one thing that I do want council to know is that many of these programs are often put together in organizations through a third party, and one of that allows the city to participate in a way that is fair to everybody. It also creates some separation. And so one of the things that you'll see is a lot of times as you go through, whether it's grants or focusing on target areas or establishing incubators, cities will partner with separate entities, and they will either help fund or help provide assistance, but it allows for that separation from, ultimately an end user, and allows the organization to help make that decision between different small businesses and entrepreneurs and who to help. So a couple of different options is that grants are one way of participating, and we've heard from the chamber and a recommendation of doing small programs. All of these programs, even if we go in with small dollar amounts, they all still have to be administered. And so something to keep in mind is that any program that is put forward, there also needs to be additional funds for administering of that program. One of the other things that communities do is that they'll focus, instead of looking at the whole market, they'll look specifically at targeted areas. And this is going on as council looks at Main Street, and maybe we're able to focus in on, specific geographic areas and tie in those, get real specific of where we want that targeted investment by entrepreneurs and small business. And then the last one of participating would be through an incubator, and the idea there is that it helps to subsidize some of those operating costs that a business would face. Couple of different programs that are out, within our community are shown here. And each of these programs are set up. They were all actually initially set up by the business community. They came together, saw the need, partnered with with themselves or with the chamber, and were able to pull together some funds to help provide access to capital. There are cities around us that have participated in these or similar programs. One thing is that the cities have joined after these programs have been established, as opposed to on the front end. And so, something to keep in mind as the council, as we seek direction from the council. And so I do want to, turn over and ask for direction as we evaluate different options. We have our assistance center in place, which really helps to identify, getting a need out there. We have the opportunity, obviously, of taking that further and developing that more and getting more specific. We have the opportunity of creating or looking at specific local grants. Staff's recommendation is that if we did do a local grant, that we would look for a third-party entity that could manage that grant, that it would not be managed by the city or by city staff. The other option is to go and to reach out to one of these partners that already has an established program that helps small businesses, and to partner with them. I do want to bring up to council that historically the city of Schertz, we have participated with this through a similar program with the Small Business Development Center, and it was a program that was very short-lived as far as our participation with it. And again, there is a cost, and so it's deciding where we want to focus and use our resources. The other option is that we consider some other option that's not laid out here. So I want to turn it over to council and any questions or direction that you have.
Thank you, Kyle. A couple of quick comments. With any business, and particularly with small businesses, cash flow is king. You can't survive if the money isn't flowing. Startup capital is critical. You're not going to open your doors and have an onslaught where you're going to instantly be profitable in most cases. Time spent is money spent, right? The time from the first invested dollar to the first production of revenue is critical, and the shorter that is, the more advantageous. I do particularly like a multifaceted approach. As you said, each business is unique. You may have two people opening the exact same franchise. Their situation is going to be unique, and they need different kinds of help. Information is critical. Knowing where to find things is critical, especially with a small business. If you have a couple of investors who are also going to be running the business, they can't get it open if they're busy trying to find information. Makes a lot of sense. So, personally, I'm very open to whatever the council decides that the council wishes to do. I would just ask and hope that it be multifaceted and not a simple rifled approach, but actually, oddly enough, a shotgun approach, where we've got lots of help available. So with that, I'm going to stop and let council ask Mr. Edwards.
I do have a couple of questions. Number one, Kyle, are we currently, or at the chamber, are we currently helping with anybody getting their Dun and Bradstreet number credit for the business?
So we are not. The only report that we can pull is about demographic information. I will highlight that the library does have access to that as being a resource if somebody wants specific information from Dun & Bradstreet or a similar type of database, that resource is available through our library.
Okay, second question. On the website, I was taking a look at the website a few minutes ago, and do we have a spot on there that would actually show what parcels are available, but not only available, but which ones are willing to subdivide? Because not very many small businesses, and you look at the size of a small business, they're not coming in to buy 50 acres, 10 acres on 3009 for millions of dollars. They're looking for half an acre. Could you guys put that information on that website as well?
So, we could add a disclaimer that they could follow up for additional, information, that they could contact Drew, who really stays on top of what's available within our market. As we looked at, as far as staff and what we looked at to manage a database and have that amount of detail, I mean, there are several thousand properties that are available that are always changing. And so our approach that we have taken at the EDC is to have, a third-party database. And so then it would be up to the broker to show, here's a 5-acre tract that is proposed to be subdivided into 5 smaller tracts.
Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Kaiser?
You were talking about the grants and the administrative costs. So can you give us an idea of what those would be? So let's say a business was given a $5,000 grant. What would we expect to pay in administration fees?
So anytime we have anytime that there is public funds that are given, there has to be an agreement. And so I don't have a specific ratio in line. So if we were to use a $5,000 grant to show, here's the, proportionally, here's how much additional it would cost. But I do want to identify some of those high-level things. So one, anytime you have a program, you do need that program to get out and to be marketed so that people know that it's available. And so there's going to be costs there. You also have to have somebody who, is working between the person who decides who is awarded that. So you have to have somebody who puts the grant together. You also have to have somebody who works between the person who's requesting the grant, the person who's awarding the grant, working with that, coming up with what those terms are. Then you have to pull in, legal as it is an agreement to create that, to create an agreement. And then there's also a compliance portion to make sure that you're getting what was intended when you gave that grant. And so those are all pieces of the cost. I do not have a specific,
like a percentage,
dollar
typically.
percentage. I don't.
And, gosh, I just totally forgot. I'll have to think about it. I forgot.
You know, one thing that I would say, you know, is you know, I will look into that further to see if we can come up with a specific percentage, but as of now, I do not have
I
that.
just remembered, sorry. Did you look into any other similar programs, maybe in the area or city similar to Schertz, size-wise, you know, income-wise, and what they're doing, and what's working for them or not working?
So the closest thing to a, you know, local flavor grant that we could find that's being done locally is very targeted to a specific geographic region. So the community has said, we want to improve, you know, this specific area, and they typically have participated through a facade grant. That's the most common. And, you know, similar, they're done through matching grants. That has been the most common here in this area.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Thompson?
This is just a question that I'd like you to find out and bring an answer back to us.
Sure.
We have bond money that is available from Main Street. Can some of that money be targeted into this local flavor without, so that it's not under the oversight of the EDC, but it's under the, so that, and it might be a variety, it might be a grant, it might be a targeted, it might be, you know, using some of those buildings on Main Street as incubators.
I'm gonna look to Brian, because I know Brian is very familiar with that bond of, is that available to use for a program?
No, Mayor, I don't believe it is. Certainly, I'll bounce that off the city attorney tomorrow, send him the bond language.
Okay. Just an idea.
But it's pretty clear it's for infrastructure purposes and not a grant or whatnot.
And one other question.
Okay. Mr. Larson?
Thank you for bringing this as a workshop item. I have a lot of ideas. Unfortunately, I don't know how to get there, and I think that's kind of the challenge, and hopefully we can get in there. But I agree, as a former small business owner, when I owned a business way before I should have, access to capital would have probably changed the trajectory, and not just financial capital, but there's real estate capital, space to a working space, a meeting space. Information capital is probably what would have saved me. Certainly, traditional capital is always our first go-to because the green talks, but there's a lot of ways to help businesses. And as I've looked at a lot of different communities, and I think the challenge is most of my comparables are in more urban centers, but I've seen nonprofits, as you said, running these incubators that include microloans, grants, incubator space, information, and that normally only large corporations would have access to, that kind of evens the playing field. And I guess my thought is, if we're going to do this, and I think we should move forward, I think we should take it with the same approach that we take everything, and it's with an end goal in mind and a long-term strategic plan on how to get there. And I know that as a city looking to partner with a nonprofit, that includes a handoff, but I'd like to see some options and maybe even explore some partnerships. What does that look like? Maybe we have somebody who can give us information on what starting that partnership looks like. We have universities surrounding us with entrepreneur programs, business management programs, technology programs. I mean, we're literally in the middle of two giant exploding technology hubs all along the I-35 corridor. I think the opportunity to attract people to Schertz by offering resources that free up individuals to kind of be the best version of themselves is something that we should aggressively pursue. And I don't know what the next step would be, other than I'd like to maybe get a little bit more detail about what does it look like for a city to partner with a nonprofit. I know in a lot of the examples I looked at, there was kind of an organic grassroots movement that contributed, but I'd like to think that we could poke the fire a little bit and move forward that way.
Mr. Davis?
Yeah, first of all, that Small Business Assistance Center, I think it's fantastic. I think it's going to be a great tool for those that want to start a business, being able to figure out exactly all the connection points to be successful in Schertz. You mentioned our previous participation in the Small Business Development Center. Can you provide us some more additional information on that? How long ago will we remember? What caused us to pull out, if that's available, and what the typical cost was? I kind of agree with you. I think it's a great idea to turn around and partner with somebody to manage this program. But I'd like to get some information on what that cost would typically be, because it's going to be above and beyond the cost that we would incur with supporting local businesses.
It would be best if I, went back and pulled out all of that information and put that together, and that's something I could come back with.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Edwards?
Yeah, I have one other comment, a couple of comments. Have you guys contacted anyone from the SBA, Small Business Administration, Teresa Scott off of 281? I mean, we're talking about a business development center. Maybe they can partner with you as well. Second thing is, we are very fortunate to have, 26, 27 banks at 3009 and 35. I mean, this is basically the financial center of South Texas right now. With that number of banks, certainly we would pull together the financial expertise from those banks and ask them to come in and see what kind of programs they would offer. I mean, they offer things like business plan writing, as well as small, very low interest loans. Those are some of the things that I think in grant programs, you can actually apply for some of those through the federal government as well.
Right.
So I think that's something that we need to take advantage of. I mean, while the iron is hot and while interest rates are very low as well, especially for some of the smaller businesses that need the cash flow. So I think that's something that we need to really consider doing. But Teresa Scott is a great resource over at 281 and 1604 for the SBA as well. And she'd be happy to come out, and she's out in the area anyway. She'd be happy to do something anyway.
Mr. Thompson?
To begin with, I very much appreciate the idea of the assistance center. We have needed for a long time, for lack of a better title, how to start a business in Schertz, so that a person can go to, and at any point along that line that you showed, they can plug and play and see where they're at. So I think that's an excellent starting point, and the way you've developed it even beyond that, I commend you. I appreciate the emphasis on starting a new business, because I think that's important for Schertz as we continue to grow. But one of the things I like about what Maggie discussed in the Residents to be Heard is, how do we give a bump to the established small business in Schertz, the one that is not necessarily in danger of leaving, but if we can give them just that extra little help and enable them to grow that next step and add 2 or 3 more employees, I think that is something that is very, very feasible, and something that we should look at as well. I do like the idea of some of the things that Maggie mentioned. I like the idea of if and when such a grant program is developed, the business being community involved. I think from my experience in working with many of the local businesses, many of the small businesses are already involved. They're the ones that sponsor the mom and pops. The little leagues, the soccer programs, et cetera. They're the ones that, Girl Scout cookies come around. They're going to buy 2 dozen Girl Scout cookies or give them away to their customers or whatever. So I think that's very good. I hadn't even thought about it, but I like the idea that, Tanya kind of not mentioned, but, maybe at this level, it's for those Schertz owners who are also Schertz residents. Why not encourage that so that we continue to build the city? But the idea that retention is better than recruitment, having worked with business who have left Schertz because they haven't found the answers they're looking for, if we could have given some of this, I think they'd have been much more likely to stay here. The last thing that I might just add as a suggestion, you mentioned the site at the library that can be referenced. Is there a way to add outside sites to refer to, and just so that they can click in and hit that link on the website the Assistance Center website, and it goes automatically to that library website.
So yeah, the Assistance Center is full of different links, and that's actually one thing that Drew's still working on, is making sure that all of the links that we send them to, that they know that we're sending them to, and that they are true partners. As far as the available properties, if it's somebody who has an available properties but it's not listed on that site, there is a way that they can add it for free, which is one reason that we chose to go with that site over others.
And regarding the Assistance Center, this was last year, but a individual with a current business in Schertz asked me if I could get some assistance in terms of information, and I was able to go to the SCUCISD. I was particularly able to go to EDC, pull together some of the information that's not even as advanced as what you're talking now. And when I showed it to that business owner, he said, "Where did you get this?" And I told him my sources, and I said, "They're free. They're on, you know." He said, "In another city, I paid tens of thousands of dollars." You call it a capital, information capital. That is a gold mine if we can do that for the city of Schertz down the road.
Dr. Kaiser?
I do like the idea of the multifaceted approach. What I would like to see is more information. You mentioned that you had talked to just a few small businesses. I think before we decide, where to target the most resources or where to put more resources in one area than another, we really need more information from more of the businesses. Because I don't like to go in and say, yes, let's focus here, and that's not really where we need it to focus. We need to know where, what the small businesses really need. And so I think we need an appropriate sample of information from the small businesses before we can really just start allocating resources to a certain area and say that's more important than this area.
One of the, just to touch on that, we have worked with, with the chamber that is the most organized group of our businesses here in Schertz, but also realizing that not everybody is a member of that membership organization. We did reach out to several. As we were putting together our initial survey, we were actually met with a lot of people who are very reluctant to give any information, and so we that's where we kind of chose to go out and get the sampling. We may, that's something that we can report back on, but we may run into challenges of getting information. That's not uncommon anywhere, that private businesses are reluctant to share information with public entities. So we'll try to make another approach. But when we did reach out, we were met with some hesitation of the information that was collected, but that is something that we can look at more.
So how many small businesses did you approach?
So we talked to about 20 different businesses.
And how many small businesses do we have in Schertz?
So there are far more than 20.
Yes.
Far more than 20.
I guess that's my point.
Yeah, no, and to be very specific, the type of businesses that we went after were those that we had heard from, that were the local, that would add a local flavor to ours. I will say that with some of the other efforts that we're doing at SEDC, or at the EDC, with our business retention manager, we are looking at tools that we can use for a business survey that will capture more, because right now we don't have that two-way communication that we're trying to work on.
Okay, thank you.
Council, anyone else? If nothing else, I think council's given you lots of things to work on.
Thank you.
So I think it is a consensus of the council. We want to do something or some things. I would go back to what you said too on one of your slides about regulatory impediments. it is a delicate balance, obviously, right? If you have a building that's 5,000 square feet or more and we require you to put in sprinklers, that's a cost impediment, but it's also a safety issue and a salient one. But finding that ideal balance between regulation, safety, and accelerating business success is an interesting exercise. So I think that the council would certainly be interested in hearing your thoughts or best practices as we go forward around where is that balance? What regulatory things might we be able to reduce in order to help incent business to come here as opposed to going to Selma or Cibolo or any of the other cities around us, or frankly San Antonio or Austin? Understanding it's a delicate balance, I hope that'll be part of what we're working on. All right. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. All right. The next item that we have on the agenda this evening is consent agenda items. And item number 1 of the minutes, since approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of June 6, 2017. And item number 2, cancellation of the July 4, 2017 City Council meeting. Either one of these need to be pulled for individual consideration. Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the items on consent?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion from Mr. Edwards, a second from Dr. Kaiser. Any other comments or questions from council? Hearing none, we'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 Got 6 ayes and no nays. The motion carries. So ordered. Item number 3, Resolution 17R37, a resolution by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing an interlocal agreement with the Comal County District Attorney and other matters in connection therewith. It's Chief Hansen.
Good evening, Mayor and Council, Mr. Kessel. There are times that through the course of an investigation or even incident to arrest that items that were used in the course of the crime or proceeds from that crime are seized by law enforcement. Now, the disposition of that property is regulated through the Texas Commission or the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure. And by law, the attorney that represents the state, which is typically our district attorney or county attorney, has the sole discretion on how that property is disposed. The property may be sent back to the law enforcement agency, but that requires that there is an agreement in place. What you have before you is the renewal of the Comal County's agreement. We would recommend the approval of the resolution that would authorize the city manager to enter into and renew this agreement.
Very good. Council, questions for Chief?
I just have one question. Can you give us more detail on the types of elements that you're speaking of? You're saying that evidence, is this, what are you giving back?
It would be
the
property or proceeds. So it could be a vehicle that was used in the commission of a crime.
So if this crime happens in Schertz, we give it back to Comal County?
Well, if a crime occurred and say the vehicle was used, by law that goes to the Comal, if it occurred in Comal County. So that would go to the Comal County District Attorney, who has the sole authority to disperse that or proceeds from that. Remember, we're in 3 counties, so
Correct.
a portion of it is in Comal County.
Okay, so it goes back to Comal County. If the crime happened in Guadalupe, it would go to Guadalupe County.
That's correct.
So I need to- okay.
Each attorney has their own agreement.
Okay, that's what I need to know. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Do we have an existing
Davis.
agreement with Bexar County and Guadalupe County?
We have, the agreements are quite different among the 3 different counties. Bexar County's, in fact, I spoke with them today and they are redoing their agreement. So
But we do currently have an agreement with Bexar County and Guadalupe County?
we do have agreements, yes, sir.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Crawford?
Chief, are they all different number of years they're in force and we renew them every so often? Is that what you're saying?
Most of the agreements self-renew. This one came up, and the reason that we brought it before council was it had a caveat that they requested the city manager approve it. By law, these agreements are typically, or by law, they are between the attorney that represents the state and the law enforcement agency. Since they added that to this one, the legal had suggested that we bring it with a resolution.
Thank you.
Very good. Anyone else? Is there a motion to approve 17R37?
So move.
Second.
Okay, help me out. Was that Mr. Davis? And who seconded? Mr. Edwards. All right, so a motion from Mr. Davis, second from Mr. Edwards. Any other comments or questions from council? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 Ayes, 7 ayes and no nays. Motion carries and is so ordered. Thank you. All right, thank you, Chief. Item number 4, ordinance 17T22, an ordinance by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing a budget amendment to create and fund an inspections plans examiner and an intern position, repealing all ordinances or parts of ordinances in conflict with this ordinance and providing an effective date. Mr. Walters.
Good evening. What you have before you is a budget amendment to increase the overall budget to allow for these 2 other positions. The intern will be just seasonal and is not expected to renew next year. If it is, it'll be brought back for you as another item to approve. The plans examiner would be approved now and would be part of the base budget going forward in the 17-18 when we submit that to council. These positions are funded this year through increased permit fees collected. So we're collecting more permit fees than we had originally thought we would, which allows us to do these 2 mid-year funding positions. To talk more on the positions, if you have any questions, we have Lisa and Mr. James will come up if you have any questions over the intern position.
Very good. Council, questions for Mr. Walters, Mr. Edwards?
I just have one question. I see that the Building Inspections Division, a plans examiner, but what is the intern position for in the city manager's office to work on special projects?
Yes, Councilman, you may remember that we've had interns in the past, some in various departments. I believe Mr. Walters, in fact, started as an intern. Mr. Wyatt Agee was an intern in the city manager's office. I think what kind of clicked with us is we have a number of kind of projects that we need somebody to focus on, somebody with kind of critical thinking skills, do some research, summarize the information, develop some recommendations. And frankly, to be perfectly honest, we were struck by the presentation the other night from the the presentation by the student from the University of the Incarnate Word and the report that they did, and really felt like that was something we could benefit, that there's some good students in the areas given the universities, and that this is a way to knock out some of those projects that may lag behind just because we don't have time to focus on it enough to move it forward. Likely what we would do is we would determine the project based on the interest and the expertise of whoever the student is that's selected.
Is this a one-time thing for the intern? Because I see it's only $4,000.
It's a one-time thing now. We'll see how this goes. Again, we've talked about an intern in the past, and I think really where we've had to make sure that we feel like we can do it is it does require time on the part of city staff to manage, to oversee, to help them along with that. And so we want to run this as a test case, see how it works for us, and then if it's successful, it may be something we find there's a lot of value in going forward.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I've got a couple of
Davis?
questions. You mentioned that funding this inspection plans examiner position this year is based off of increased revenue that we've had on permit applications. But I'm assuming that you're talking about making this a full-time funded position, which means it would roll into the next fiscal year budget. My concern with this is we've given an estimate in our packet of $22,000, but you go on to say that we don't even know if we're going to be able to fill a position in this fiscal year because of the hiring process.
Yes, sir.
What it does not address is what is the fiscal impact going into the next budget year. And we're getting ready to talk about our upcoming budget. So to me, I think we're getting a little bit ahead of the carts, or the cart's ahead of the horse on this one. I'd be interested in knowing how this full-time funded position is going to rack and stack with other budget requirements in the upcoming budget. And by locking it in now with a guesstimate of $22,000, I think it is doing a disservice to our budget process. Number two, do we have any kind of a written policy that deals with interns in the city at this time?
We have a reference to interns in the handbook, in the employee handbook. There's a reference, but I don't know that we have a policy per se. No, sir.
My concern with having interns is we're talking about bringing someone in that may be a student, or they may be someone who just graduated from school and is looking for an intern position to further their career. And without a lack of an established policy before we start this program, runs the risk of not helping them with their school program, because if they are in fact a student, if I'm not mistaken, the school is going to put a lot of restrictions on what they can and cannot do and how it relates to their program. And then if it's somebody that is graduated from school but is looking for a career broadening thing, if we don't have a formal policy in place that talks about the type of projects they work on, their work hours, their evaluation process, all of those pieces, to me, again, this is another example of we're flying the airplane as we're building it. I'm a firm believer in intern programs, but I would think that before the city starts going down the path of an intern program, that we would develop policies and procedures for the selection, monitoring, evaluation, term of the intern program, all that stuff, before we go out and just say, here's money, go find an intern to work on a special project.
Yes, sir.
If there's no other discussion, Mayor, I'll have a motion.
Council, Mr. Larson.
I just had some question on one of the things it mentioned is that there's been an increased time frame for permit applications. Do we have any more raw data related to that? Like what does that look like for business owners? Are they waiting 6 weeks instead of 4 weeks instead of 2 weeks? What's our service level that our goal versus what we're doing right now?
Sure, I know, and I'll Lisa talk to it. I know we adjusted the length of time on the website that we list, that we're going to.
So currently on our website for residential construction, we have a time frame of 5 to 10 working days or business days. Right now, with the amount of permits that we have, and I kind of brought some numbers for y'all to kind of understand where some of the changes have come in. Last year, from October of 2015 to September of 2016, we took in an average of 23 residential, or we had an average of 23 residential new homes start here in the city. Currently, from October to today, we are having an average of 36 new homes start, which is, a 50% increase in new homes being built in the city.
Excuse me, is that per month?
That's per month, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's our monthly average. And those are monthly average numbers. Also, we're seeing on our miscellaneous permits, which would be our pool permits, those deck permits, those things for folks who are coming in monthly. Between the last fiscal year for 15-16, we saw an average of 308 permits coming through. This year, from October to today, we have an average of 412 permits coming through. So we're seeing a substantial increase. That's a 33% increase. On our commercial projects, then we're also having plans come through that are, the volume is not, drastically different, but the complexity of them are. So for instance, the school projects, CCMA, there's a lot of commercial projects. And with that, we have actually had some delay in time. So our residential new projects are that 5 to 10 days. We were actually getting closer to 5 days, is now more 15 days or more in-house. And our commercial projects they could take 45 to 60 days, where we were kind of in the 30, 45 day range, just based on the complexity of some of those. And so, with each of those new projects coming in, we also have inspections that come with those. So each new house, just the standard house, has an average of 22 inspections. So that averages to, 100 extra inspections a month if that house took 3 months to build. And so those 3 full-time inspectors can now spend time doing those extra inspections, that those larger projects that actually are now probably going to take us another 18 months to 24 months on the school projects, of those extra inspections that are going to be coming through. And they'll be able to focus more on that. So they'll spend majority of the time, which they are supposed to do in the field doing the inspections, instead of spending time coming in to do the actual reviews. And then, of course, our standard miscellaneous permits are just taking longer for our customers. And I know the level of service that's expected here is, we're having difficulty being able to do that, because our inspectors and our plan reviewers are in the field doing inspections and working on some of these complex projects that weren't able to take care of them in as timely fashion as we would like to. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. And then in terms of, and excuse my ignorance on this, but a plans examiner, they're in the buildings inspections division. Would they also be able to be performing the actual building inspection, or is that a completely separate role?
So it depends on the way the the way we're hoping to do is have a preferred somebody who can do plumbing inspections also. But the idea of this is for this person to stay in the office to do plan review, residential, commercial, so they'd be a combination plan reviewer and certified to do that, as well as wait on customers, meet with new commercial folks, sit down, walk them through the process, be able to do that one-on-one that we can do, but it's just an extended time period. They would be available, hopefully daily, to do that.
And so the current bottleneck in the extended service level times, you would say, is the plans examiner. I guess my concern is if we solve the plans examiner problem, which I guess we don't want to ignore a problem just because another one might exist, but if we solve that, do we then have the same bottleneck existing in the inspections process?
I guess there's a possibility for that, but at this point, our 3 full-time inspectors are doing plans review also.
Okay.
And so that would free them up from the plans review that they're doing to spend more time in the field.
And then finally, it talks about budget increase being offset by increased permit fees. Do we know a ratio? Are we talking about it's 100% offset by the increased fees or near it, or?
So this year, it's going to be, we're bringing more permit fees than just this.
Okay.
Permit fees vary year to year on what they actually come in at, so this position would be needed next year as well, help keep that ratio down if there's that same residential influx keeps coming at that same rate.
Okay, and I guess I do have a little bit of commentary then related to this. I think it almost seems, if it's based off permit fees, it almost seems like a user fee. And I know, as we just talked about business and their needs and capital needs, and 30 days of not producing revenue is a significant capital expenditure. But so on that, I think that's a positive development to use user fees to increase the service level. But I do share some of Mr. Davis's concerns regarding the internship. I don't know how detailed we need to get about a plan, but one of the things I think of as an internship is the reason that we got such a great result from the students on the trash pickup and recycling and waste management is that they were given a directive that was focused, and they stayed in their lane. And I think when you have so many fires that need to be put out, there's a temptation to utilize an intern for less focused, less beneficial means. And so in terms of that, I might like to see a little bit more definition of what that internship program would look like. And I think it would be great, but I'd like to see more definition there.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Thompson?
Thank you. I appreciate the idea of adding this budgeted position of the plans and review person, because to me, this becomes the foundation for future revenue in the city. The faster we can speed this process up, the faster we can go through permits and inspections to certificate of occupancy, the sooner that business starts producing revenue for the city of Schertz. The faster we can get a homeowner into their home, the more likely they are to start spending money in the city of Schertz. So I believe this is a foundational position, and I'm pleased to see the progress in this area.
Mr. Davis?
You know, I have to piggyback on what's Councilman Larson said. And my concern, again, I understand the importance of the examiner position. My concern is we're talking about funding what is ultimately going to be a full-time position based on current increased revenues from permit fees. There's nothing guaranteed that permit fees will be at that level next year. In the request, you're talking about $22,000 to cover this position this year, going into next year's budget, that at the best estimate would cover 90 days. Right. So carrying that out over a full-time position, that's $88,000 in next year's budget for this position, which again may or may not be covered by fees. It may be something that comes out of the general operating budget. If based on the information that was submitted tonight, that we don't know how fast we're going to get this position out there, then I could make the same argument that $22,000 might cover 2 months. And if it covers 2 months, August and September, then you can extrapolate that out next year, that this position is going to cost the city $132,000. So my concern is not that whether or not we need a plans examiner position. My concern is, how is it being funded in the future? And we're putting a position on the books preemptively 90 days before we start talking about the budget. I'd be interested in knowing how this relates to the next year's fiscal budget. Is this, and again, I agree 100% with Councilmember Thompson that it's needed to ensure we're taking care of the backlog.
Right.
I'd be interested in knowing, is this going to be the number one position that we need to add to the budget? Is this going to be the number 5? Where does it fit with the cut lines, and what's it going to ultimately cost? And I think we're doing a disservice to the council when we come up and say, well, we've got an extra $22,000 available out of this year out of excess permit fees, and with that, we want to create a position that will be full-time carried on our books going forward without understanding the full cost of that position.
Yeah, I would agree, Councilman. I think it's, in particular, it's a valid concern. One of the problems with coming forward with particular budgetary items mid-year is that you tend not to look at that, you tend not to look at the full opportunity costs. You don't sort of rack and stack and say, how does this stack up against everything else? And that's the problem with it. And so that's why I think there's generally a reluctance to come forward with particular items, because you're not looking at everything compared against one another. So I think that's a very valid point. I think what prompted staff to bring this one forward at this time was the last time we were up here in part with regard to talking about some of our permitting process with regard to the code adoption and code updates. And as we walk council through where our permit timeframes had hit, there seemed to be a clear direction that we want to avoid that going forward. And so part of this, and I can appreciate there may have been a better way that staff could have done this with a work session item to say, let us walk you through permit timeframes and see where we are, is because those timeframes have lagged. And so valid point with that. I think one of the things you will keep in mind is we do have on-call firms that are doing contract work with us. We are going to be coming forward again with you in short order to increase and renew those contracts because of the work. So I think I would agree that if we were not relying so heavily on the contract firms, that we could subsequently reduce because of this position, I would be more concerned probably, and that's not to diminish your concern, but I think where we felt like we are is we have seen the permit numbers up high enough for a long enough period of time that we felt like it makes sense to bring someone in, start to wean ourselves off the permit number, off the contract help, because the contract help is much easier to raise or lower the level we use that based on the permit numbers going forward. And you're right, part of the concern we have whenever we add inspections, folks, is we get a spike in development, those permit numbers go up, things cool down, and the permit numbers drop off. I think part of the reason for this is those inspections that come with it. With regard to the intern position, don't disagree that helpful to have that framework. That's why we have not come forward with anything at various staff levels with the budget. I think part of the idea on this one is to bring that intern in. We would learn some things from it to help formulate that policy. I would agree particularly if we think this person's going to knock out a whole bunch of stuff, that's not the case. It really is focused on one particular project or effort, solely that going forward. But certainly valid concerns on both were, and staff understands if council would like to not approve this tonight, have us come back with more information, and again, perhaps as we move forward into the budget, make some adjustments going forward.
Mr. James.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Crawford, please.
What do we do if Chief Hansen and Chuck Van Zant and Doug Ledbetter want another 1 or 2 people for the next quarter and want to put them on the budget? I think Mr. Davis has a pretty valid point. The problem is it's difficult to decide what's fair and what we really need. We have some kind of idea what our growth's going to be right now, don't we, for the next 5 years or something, or maybe not 5, maybe 3, maybe 7.
We do. We have the 5-year.
We got some pretty good historical
yes,
data.
sir.
We know how many houses have been platted and that kind of stuff. So I don't really want to say right this second that we shouldn't do something, I'm saying, how can we be equitable across other departments that are in the city? Mr. Van Zant spent an afternoon and a morning telling us that he needed help in the parks, and I think that's probably a valid concern. But I also know from talking to Mr. Kessel and you that we match the number of people in the city to the number of jobs available for the amount of work we have, and we can't always do everything we want to do every year. We'd like to do a lot more, I know. But I raised that question to think about. It's somewhat rhetorical, but Mr. Davis's question is a valid point about how do we justify what we're going to do for next year's budget. We haven't started talking about it yet, and this comes up ahead of time. So,
Yeah, fair enough point. I don't disagree with you.
Mr. Mayor?
I just have,
Dr. Kaiser?
just one thing to kind of echo some of that, and maybe this is an oversimplification, but if we have 10 positions open for the next fiscal year, and 5 are going to Fire Station 3, and we were to approve this, then everyone else is having to wait until we're approving the budget to say, hey, we need all these people, and we haven't even looked at those. Is that correct?
That's accurate.
That would take one of those positions automatically.
Yes,
So as Mr. Crawford was saying, if we need new police officers, Parks and Rec, Public Works, they have now, one slot has now already been taken with this approval.
That's correct.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, and I hear these concerns, and I actually think that they are very valid. But these are the things that I like being on council for, right? It's never cut and dry, because there is the flip side of the coin, and the flip side of the coin, to play devil's advocate, is that there are residents waiting for homes to be built and businesses waiting for buildings to be built. And if we're going to be talking about equity, we should certainly consider the user fee-based equity of them waiting an additional 30, 45 days for permits that they're paying for, but they're not receiving a service level that's reasonable. And the cost of maintaining insurance and maintaining employees and training employees, only to find that there's an additional month lag between their business opening when they thought it would open and they can begin to generate revenue. And so we think about one of the struggles with government is always, because these are very complicated issues, we often move very slowly, and I think that generally that's very good. But in some instances, when we're talking about our economic engine and we're talking about how important it is to have business incubators, and then we're making decisions that slow the process of building homes and building businesses and slow that economic engine, because we want to make sure that everybody gets equity on the side of the government side. And I think we should at least, I'm not saying it's the right path, but we should at least consider that there is equity to consider on the terms of the citizen side as well. And one of the common complaints I've gotten from business owners is how long it's taken for them to get their buildings permitted and inspected. Sometimes weeks, sometimes months, sometimes multiple days without hearing back, just to find out the inspector's been swamped. And so as we do get ready to make a motion or vote on this, whatever it is, I do think that there are two sides to that coin that we should evaluate when we make a decision.
Mr. Thompson?
I appreciate Councilman Davis and Councilwoman Kaiser on their remarks about Councilman Crawford about how this impacts next year. But my experience with the city in my brief tenure is that when the city does bring a mid-year adjustment before the council, it's not lighthearted. It's not a quick thing. It's something that's been studied, something that's been calculated. And so my presumption in asking this next question is, when you brought this to us, you were aware that it would impact that one slot for next year.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. James,
Yes, sir.
I don't have a magic wand, and I can't see in the future. I know we grew fast. We're still growing, I guess, reasonably well. I mean, I don't know all the numbers of houses that have been platted since I got off P&Z, but and you and I have talked several times about controlling growth and mechanisms for that. That's difficult. You know, if you don't put sewer lines in, we can't have commercial property available at the time. And if we put sewer lines in, we'll have 1,400 dozen people coming along wanting to do something, and we don't have the people to support that. So I'm maybe wasting your time, but it's a tough position to be in, to know we need more people and not have enough money. And-
Yes, sir. But I will say this, if I may. We are a fast-growing community, and what staff needs to fully understand is when you come on board at the city of Schertz, or many of our surrounding communities, or frankly, you work in Texas generally, you're signing on to a fast-growth city, which means you have a lot of demand, you don't have the resources that have caught up yet, and that's part of what you get. Now, you get a lot of great experience, and if you want to be busy and do a bunch of stuff, this is the place to be. So there's that. I will say this. We brought this forward because of the concerns expressed before, and because of that permit number. But to be blunt from a staff perspective, to hold off on this, to get a few more months in the budget, to get a better feel for where we are, and if clearly as council we go through those retreats, sees that this is a priority and says, yeah, let's pull the trigger, bring it forward in, literally a month from now or 6 weeks from now, that is not the end of the world. From a staff perspective, given the challenges we have had hiring this, it will take us a while to hire. So again, to be very clear, I can certainly appreciate the comment of, let's look at the big picture, let's look at the opportunity cost. I can certainly appreciate let's do everything we can to move those permits through the process in a timely manner while doing a quality review, and can appreciate that. I don't have a magic wand either. Either way, staff is going to go back and we're going to do the best we can and make the best of this, and valid concerns either side. So part of this, and again, maybe could have done it in a different way that would have been better, is to let you know, to give you a heads up, that because of the volume of residential, because of the miscellaneous permits, and frankly with commercial, it's the complexity, staff is falling behind and wanted to make you aware of it. But 2 months isn't going to kill us.
Hold on just a minute. I want to bring up both a point of order and point of procedure. You may or may not notice I keep a list as council goes through discussions, especially when we have this much discussion. And I try to make sure everybody has an equal opportunity at their microphone. And so if I'm not acknowledging you, it's not because I don't want to acknowledge you. I'm making sure that everyone has equal opportunity to speak. And I would ask as well that you ask to be recognized, because that is what helps me as well keep track and make sure that majority and minority opinions are always heard. So that said, I've got 3 requests right now to speak, I believe, and all, hold on just a second, all 3 have been heard twice. So Mr. Davis, your turn, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well done.
I'm not trying to be difficult. I just want to be fair.
Again, I don't want to confuse my vision. Again, I'm looking at the big picture, and some of the points that were brought up. I certainly am concerned about the processing times for our businesses and our employees. But as you mentioned, we have an on-call firm to review these things. And if we have brought in excess money this year up to this point, we could just as easily use that excess money at this point in the budget to reach out to that firm to have them pick up more slack and handle the more complex ones, versus adding a position out of cycle mid-year, and actually very late in the mid-year, before we have a chance to evaluate the entire cost of that position and as it relates to the needs of other city departments and functions out there. And I also want to follow back on one other comment you made about bringing on an intern and then using that experience to develop policies. We've had interns. There's one a former intern standing right to your right. My concern is we've been down this road before, yet we really don't have a lot of solid policies with regards to interns. My concern is, at what point do we actually take care of the policies and make this a formalized program? And again, as it relates to the budget, maybe this is one of those things where if we have a flushed out policy on interns, this is a process that is potentially beneficial, not just to the city manager's office for their special projects, but to other departments like the police department, like fire, like EMS, like the parks department, where we can get those interns in and help those young folks develop their careers and help get an outside view into our departments rather than just, let's grab an intern now and we'll worry about the details later. I would much rather see a flushed out intern policy and program for the city, and then we can discuss that as we come up into this year's fiscal budget to get the right interns in the right spots, whether it's one or several.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Larson?
I just had a question regarding the contract firm availability option. What is our current annual fiscal budget for contract labor, or the limit that we allow for the outsourcing of the building inspections?
I'd have to pull those contracts to see what the limit we set. I think we've got 3 of them, that we have 3 of these, so we can come back with that information as a written update for the next meeting as to what those limits are and where are we today.
Well, and then in terms of cost, what does it cost for a 40-hour? If we were to hire a contract firm to work with the capacity of a full-time employee, what would that dollar cost be versus the cost of hiring an employee to do that same work in-house?
We can provide you that comparison as well, yes, sir.
Okay, we don't have any estimates available
I
now.
hate to stand up here and give you that estimate. I mean, we can certainly provide that for you. I'm confident that obviously the contract firm would be higher. Part of it is the staff time in managing the contract firm and the employees there. To some degree, I think there's a bit of diminishing return with the firms that we've got relative to how many hours we use them and their availability and things like that in terms of staff time, just to look over the work that they do, coordinate their efforts, bring them in. They have other cities they work for, and their availability at times is limited. So I can provide that for you. Again, while there's that dollar comparison, there's also the efficiency with which they're able to get the work done, and the amount of staff oversight that goes into that as well.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be important to me because I'd hate to try to save $22,000 for the next budget and spend $40,000 doing it. So that would be helpful information, yes.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Thompson?
Mr. Larson asked the essential question that I was going to ask. How much do we have invested in contract in the contract companies, on-call companies, and how much of that work could this person take over? So we might see a sliding scale. The more this person gets, the less the contract, and then the money, I would guess, would even be in our favor.
Yes, sir. We would certainly anticipate that bringing in the additional position, we would not use the contract firms as much as we would otherwise. I will say this, that part of the reason it's difficult to quantify that has to do with the timing of the inspections that come in. And just to be clear, while it's a plans examiner position, currently the chief building official and the 3 inspectors, along with the contract firms, do the plan review. And one of the challenges is, as Lisa mentioned, as we issue those permits, a period of time later, the inspections start rolling in. And again, that's a bit of the challenge given the different time frames of the projects and the different level of inspections associated with each. So it's hard to quantify because of the different schedules and the number of inspections that go with it. Ironically, some of the larger projects that you typically see from EDC, the industrial stuff, that's a relatively quick plan review in terms of a 300,000 square foot warehouse, whereas a medical office building, much smaller, is much more time consuming with regard to inspections and plan review because of some of the different requirements and things like that. So it makes it difficult.
Well, I recognize Mr. Edwards. Another point of order, when Mr. Davis was recognized the second time, he did state that he had a motion to make. So as a parliamentary matter, he has the first right at making a motion. So just want to make sure everybody's aware of that. All of the conversation we've had since then has been a yield from Mr. Davis from his stating he had a motion to make. Mr. Edwards.
Mr. Mayor, I think that we need a lot more information, it seems. It seems like the whole council is asking questions that are pertinent to making a decision here. So I will yield to my colleague to the right, Mr. Davis, and see what his motion is at this time.
Mr. Gutierrez.
Just the point, while others are focusing on how much you're going to spend for this position, I'm focusing on how much we're losing by not getting this position. If I think the average appraisal home is about 200,000 K, am I correct around there?
No, I think the typical new home in Schertz roughly is about 280,000.
Okay. Well, let's put it on the downside then of 200. That's a potential $300,000 a year that we're losing by not getting these permits out as quickly as possible. We're losing about over, I would say, maybe $15,000 a month by holding off and not getting these permits approved. Am I correct?
Certainly, I think, let me say this, I may get a quick reaction from council, but in the short term, we don't really lose anyone. Most of the folks who come in and start that permitting process, they're going to be in Schertz and they're going to be here, and whether it takes us 2 months to get through a permit or 3 months to get through a permit, they're going to still be in Schertz. I think what happens over the longer haul is, as folks become aware and we have that average length of time and we gain a reputation for how long it takes to get through the process, that certainly is a factor at times with economic development deals and someone who needs to go quickly. But that's not an immediate because of what we're facing now or the next 3 months. I think there is some validity to the longer it takes us to kind of approve the plans, get the inspections done, and get the thing built and CO'd, it comes onto the tax rolls later, and so there's a lag time there. Now, yeah, there's a lag time there, but certainly, again, to be clear, I want to be very, very clear. Our goal is to move people through the process as quickly and as painlessly as possible and do a thorough review that upholds the ordinances and codes of the city. And we will continue to do that. We'll use all the resources we have going forward, as we have been and always do.
Thank you.
To Mr. Gutierrez's point, 36 permit applications per month, 12 months, average 280,000 is $121 million, just shy of $121 million of taxable value. That said, Mr. Davis, will you go with it? I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson?
One just further thought. Between a 5 to 10 to 15 day on a residential may not seem like a lot. Beforehand, when we were at our worst, I was working on new home sales. And we would tell a potential resident in a Schertz-based subdivision, this is how long it's going to take for the permitting process in the city of Schertz. This is how long it takes in another city. And we would almost immediately lose the sale in Schertz because they could buy the same home on the same size lot in a different city and get it up to 3 months quicker. So once they're in the pipeline, I would agree with you, but we need to make sure that pipeline doesn't get so long that people also get scared off.
I would agree, and keep in mind where we were before almost a couple of years ago. Part of that discussion was staff proposing to say, let's bring in the contract firms. We had been using 2 primarily. We added a 3rd, and we'll continue down that path as we move forward. I will say that we've also worked to increase efficiencies. Our first reaction is not need more staff, need more staff. We've done things like scanning permits as they come in as opposed to before the permit's issued. So we will continue to work to improve efficiencies. We will probably also come in short order to maybe do away with, or to float the idea of doing away with a garage sale permit. Again, it eats up some of our time, and there's probably very little value. So again, to be clear, part of what we look at is the entire process to gain efficiencies, to focus on the most important things, to look at the options we have, and we'll continue to do that. And again, so while it's longer than we'd like, we'll continue to work through that as best we can.
Mr. Crawford?
Mr. James?
Yes, sir.
I know you've been doing the contracting for the inspections and other things also. Have you given some thought, or could you give some thought to, if we've been doing it for a couple of years, is there a plan to when we might want to hire somebody out of that group, if possible, and have them work with us and reduce the contracting, although we would be increasing the salary because there is a difference in costing there. But we've been through this long enough to know, have a feel, and we know what the growth is going to be. So could you look at that for 3 minutes or 5 minutes and come up with what we might do in the future?
Sure, and I think we'll continue to balance that. Again, I will say that staff, I don't see us getting away from contracting, because the reality is the economy will turn in decline and we will not need all of those resources. So there is a lot of value to being able to reduce the services with a contract firm and not have this dilemma of, do I cut staff because the economy is turned down? And it's not just a matter of the tax revenues not there to fund things. I really don't need those folks because the permit numbers are down. I have too many people. So we will continue to find that balance as we go forward.
There's no doubt you need a slack variable of some kind. If you don't have a slack variable, it's real hard to manage the dollars
that's
and
right.
the production and everything else. So
And the contract-
a slack variable is nice to have to the extent that you can afford and justify probably.
Yes, sir.
So I'm not opposed to that concept. I'm just saying, we've been doing this for several years. We should know kind of a feel when we should hire somebody and what that might be. And maybe we hire one person, we need the contracting to go for another year or two to figure things out. I don't know.
I think the challenge there, Councilman, is in part, to be very clear, it's the time it takes to get through the permit process, which has been a lot of the focus tonight for valid reason. Some of the other comments have touched on the level of customer service that folks expect. Some of the frustration we get isn't about the time, it's about the complexity of the process. And as I said, ironically, if you get a firm that comes in that builds industrial buildings all over the place, they're pretty solid at it. They know the questions to ask, they know what to do. But again, maybe a homeowner who's trying to pull a deck permit, hopefully they're trying to pull a deck permit as opposed to do it themselves and get caught for not having a deck permit and then having to come back and react. But it's the frustration of understanding the process, and one of the challenges is having the time to give that personalized service. But again, some of the things we're doing with efficiencies go to that. So all of those things go in. What's the level of service we expect? What's the time frame, et cetera?
Mr. Edwards.
This will be my last comment, actually. James, can you answer this question? We're talking $22,000 for the next 90 days. If we look at a full-time equivalent for that employee, what are we paying total compensation? So we're talking $88,000. How much are we talking for this full-time equivalent?
So to be clear, that $22,000 in the budget adjustment right now also includes all the equipment and desk and computer, which brings that up a little bit. My last look at the position after all that's been purchased, as the reoccurring salary is closer to $66,000.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Davis, would you like to make a motion or cede your preference?
I would, sir. Pending some more in-depth financial analysis of the inspections plans examiner position and the development of specific policy for interns for the city, I would move to disapprove ordinance 17T22.
Second.
I have a motion from Mr. Davis, a second from Dr. Kaiser. Other comments or questions from council? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
Excuse me, nay.
Nay.
Aye.
Nay.
Aye.
Aye.
I have 4 ayes and 3 nays. The motion carries and is so ordered. All right, thank you, everyone. Item number 5 is Resolution 17R38, a resolution by the City Council of City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing expenditures with VIP staffing totaling no more than $75,000 for temporary staffing services during the 2016-2017 fiscal year and other matters in connection therewith. Good evening.
Good evening, sir. Mayor, Council. I'm here tonight on behalf of a number of city departments who utilize contract and temporary personnel services to fill gaps while they're seeking to permanently fill vacancies within their departments. We have in the past used a handful of agencies to meet these needs, but more recently we've been relying much heavier on a local temp agency called VIP. And for a number of reasons that's been the case, but namely because they are able to meet our needs in terms of availability of staff, and also we've seen that attendance of those temporary staff is much better than whenever we're calling on folks from the metro San Antonio area. So tonight, to date, we have spent $55,000 with VIP, and so to that end, we have already released a formal competitive solicitation to permanently award a contract to one or more firms for these services going forward. But in the interim, we would like to be able to to continue to provide these services to the departments. We have a number of requests right now of departments who are needing these temporary services. So what you see before you tonight is a request for additional funding with VIP until we can permanently award a contract for these services.
Very good, thank you. Council, questions? Mr. Larson?
So just to clarify, this $75,000, it's the limit of $75,000 starting from $0 from now to the end of the fiscal year?
No, sir. To date, we have spent $55,000, so we're requesting an additional $20,000 today.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Edwards?
It says here that the staff did not realize the 50,000 limit had been reached, and it went over by, 5,000?
Yes, sir. That is correct.
And so you're coming to us for the 20,000 for council because we need to approve anything over 50,000, number one, for the city manager.
Yes, sir. Whenever we spend more than $50,000 with one vendor, it is the city's practice to request authorization from council to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Crawford?
I'm probably saying the same thing that Mr. Edwards said. You didn't realize that you had spent over 50,000.
No, sir, we did not. Because
No.
we have, oh, I'm sorry.
You spent 5,000 more, so the total for the rest of, you're adding another 20 for the rest of the year, is that correct? Or am I missing something?
No, sir, you're correct. We're requesting an additional $20,000 through the end of this fiscal year to
Okay.
be spent with VIP. Yes, sir.
Anyone else? Mr. Mayor? Mr. Davis? Who's responsible for monitoring this particular contract with the $50,000 limit?
So currently, our financial system does not have a way to monitor. We can monitor when we spend $50,000, but whenever we have numerous departments using the same vendor, we have found ourselves in a situation like this where we have exceeded quickly and not been able to track. I can tell you that we have already identified several ways that we can address this issue. So in the in the future, we will be looking at issuing one PO for the total contract amount and only paying against that PO to ensure that we do not exceed the amount in the future. That's not been the practice to date. That's only one of the solutions. I can tell you that we've also been working with some of the departments, some of the heavier users for this type of service, and they have also identified some other ways that we can ensure that this doesn't happen in the future.
Okay, so if I got this right now we have an audit issue where we're unable to track whether or not we exceed I don't know if the word is a statutory limit, but a limit that is imposed on city fiscal policies. The other question I have is, you mentioned that we're looking for $20,000. We want to increase the limit from $50,000 to $75,000 because we've already exceeded it by $5,000 inadvertently, and we're looking for another $20,000. And the comment was just made that it's because we have multiple departments that require administrative assistance, correct?
No, sir, I'm sorry, not administrative assistants, different types of
Staffing.
Yes, different types of
Okay.
staffing.
So we have multiple departments that require additional staffing for various items between now and the end of the year. But in the background paper that we've provided to support 17R38, the only thing that's mentioned is the city secretary's office.
Yes, sir. I'm happy to provide with you the additional ones. We also have the EMS billing office who has requested clerical help as they have been down, and we'll have another individual out on medical leave, as well as animal services, which was a more recent development. They are also requiring the use of temporary staff right now. And then we do have the city secretary, which will be coming up. So there was 3 additional, plus the departments who are continuing to use them on a regular basis.
If we have multiple departments that are requesting this kind of support that's driving a $20,000 bill, how come they were not included in the background paper that we received as part of our package?
That was just an oversight on my part, sir.
Thank you.
Councilmember Davis. Also, to speak to the issue a while ago about how do we capture this, a few years ago, this was a much larger problem. And we hired a qualified purchasing manager who came in and schooled the department heads at the time about the necessary need to be able to track this to $50,000. And we've made a number of changes as we've come through these issues over the last, how long you been with us? Over the last 2.5 years to help correct this and limit it. Now it's more of an exception. The issue we have with our financial software is that it's a manual report that has to be run, and so one department who picks into this, and I'll pick on EMS because I'm most familiar with it, they need a billing clerk to help them while they have a billing clerk out on family medical leave, is they will look at that and say, well, I'm only spending $5,000 of this money, so I'm not going to hit that $50,000 level. And so what our new purchasing manager that Jessica hired, Mark, is working on doing is developing a new process. So Jessica helped us develop processes for, say, Public Works buying asphalt for multiple projects and things like that, where we had multiple projects, but it was coming out of the same fund. She's helped them determine or develop processes in place where we don't run into those issues anymore. We're not coming forward from Public Works saying, hey, we need help with that. What we're tackling now is this more difficult problem where we have multiple different departments dipping into that and pulling out a little bit here and a little bit there. And so as we continue to find these oversights, we'll continue to work with that and develop these processes that we'll put on and policies on top of the department heads to help prevent these from reoccurring in the future.
Mr. Gutierrez.
Just to be clear, for clarification, this resolution is requesting that we continue the services.
Mr. Gutierrez, I apologize for interrupting, but would ask everyone that's present in the gallery, if you have a conversation, if you take it outside the chambers. Mr. Gutierrez, please go ahead.
So I lost my train of thought here. Okay, so this resolution is requesting two items, if I'm not mistaken. One is to continue the services with VIP because we exceeded the 50,000, and additional fundings. Am I correct?
Right,
Not to exceed 75.
Continue use with using VIP in a not to exceed amount of 70.
Can you get closer to the mic, please?
Twofold resolution because we exceeded it and the additional funding.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Edwards.
Mr. Mayor, could you please refresh my memory? When we, when council a few years ago, we changed the contract limits, am I not correct, to 50,000? Right. So
That's correct.
if we went to 55,000, because there was several departments participating, what do we do in that regard? Because I thought it was against our, and you can refresh my memory, we gave John, the city manager at that time, we gave them the opportunity to make contract decisions under 50,000. Am I correct?
I believe that's correct, if I recall.
So what do we do in this particular instance when we've gone over by 5,000 and we're requesting another 20?
So I'll let the city manager respond.
So, Mr. Edwards, Mayor Pro Tem,
Hold on just a minute. I apologize, Mr. Kessel. I will ask one more time for those that are in the gallery if you're having other conversations. If I can hear you all the way up here, that probably be disturbing other folks in here. So if you take that outside, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Mr. Kessel.
Mr. Edwards, the way that our process works is each department is authorized to enter those contracts, and because there's different departments utilizing the same company, we did not notice that we had exceeded that amount. As soon as it was noticed that it was over, we of course come to the City Council and say we've exceeded that amount and we're seeking authorization to move forward. The reason that we would ask for additional money is we have a few known continuing VIP staffing needs. The one that's fairly unique, in my opinion, is the City Secretary's office for the reasons that are known to council. There's a number of other firms that we could use, and so if this was not approved, it would be possible for us to go to San Antonio and spend an equivalent amount of money and not use the local firm. Obviously, we feel the local firm is a far superior firm for a variety of reasons. We've had good luck. We don't want to arbitrarily tell them that there's an artificial cap that easily could be remedied by city council action. If there's a concern that we had multiple departments utilizing that same local firm, that would in fact be on me. And so we can talk about that at a different time. But I think it's important for us to look at this issue as one where we can either continue to move forward with this local VIP staffing for the rest of the fiscal year, or we can seek those services from a different out-of-town company.
And if I may, as I mentioned, we have released a solicitation for competitive formal proposals for these services. And so at that time, after we receive them and they are reviewed, we will be bringing a recommendation to council for a permanent contract for these services to either one or more firms for future use.
Just for clarification.
Hold on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Edwards, is that all?
I'm sorry. Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Dr. Kaiser.
Just for some clarification on, as Mr. Davis was saying, on who's responsible. So I understand every department head, has their needs. I have no problem with that. But who do they ask for that? They just automatically go to VIP staffing and say, I need staffing and this is what it costs. It doesn't go to the purchasing manager, a central repository, so that they know exactly how much is being spent all the time?
So the departments, those who are using them all the time, have created a relationship and sometimes are going directly to VIP. We are working with the departments to get that all streamlined. So
Is that the current policy, that they go straight to VIP?
It is the current practice, yes, ma'am.
So that there is no policy per se?
Not about how we actually obtain the temporary staff, no, ma'am.
And if it's not a repeat, so a primary area where we have a lot of repeat is in our facility services. So custodial workers will come in, we'll hire them as full-time employees. They'll depart shortly afterwards, and in the time frame it takes to post again, because of the requirements to keep the buildings clean, the civic center up, the library going, they have a carte blanche, not a carte blanche, but they have the ability to go straight to VIP and say, hey, we need a worker. Because we get so many temporary workers to fill in for those vacancies in the custodial line, then they go right there. Another example would be EMS. EMS hasn't used temporary services in 2 or 3 years. When the EMS director needed a temp for the billing office because he was down one clerk and he had a second clerk going out on FMLA, he brought that to me as executive director. I approved it, sent the approval to HR. HR reached out to VIP because EMS doesn't have that relationship. So if it's somebody that uses them frequently because of a high turnover department like our facility services are, then they have more of a one-on-one relationship with VIP, and VIP when facility services calls, they know exactly what those requirements are, and they dispatch those people quickly. Sometimes somebody can walk out of the job today saying, I'm not going to do this anymore, I'm tired of cleaning. They walk out, and the next day we could have a temp in there that has custodial experience in here helping us do custodial work, as opposed to the others where it's a one-off like EMS and other places like that where we would use temporary help in a clerk role or an admin role, something like that. And those would go through their executive director and HR to get approval, because it's not it's a one-off. It's not an everyday occurrence. I hate to say it.
And so the department heads, do they get any type of report, let's say monthly, saying, okay, X amount of dollars have been used? Do they know? Because, some are able to just call, others go through you. Do they get a report? So would I know if I'm a department head and I need, staffing? I don't know where it's at. Are we already at the 50,000?
Part of that comes through HR, if I'm not mistaken. And then the others comes, like for facilities, they get that invoice straight from VIP staffing and they pay it.
No, but the total that's been used by
What
the
Ms.
city.
Kurz talked about was her and Mark are working on consolidating that process to have a single purchase order. So at the start of the fiscal year, we would have a single purchase order for VIP staffing, and then EMS would give their 3 weeks of clerk help to either HR or purchasing. Facilities would do that same thing, so it's all being taken out of that one, and then when that purchase order approaches, and it may be done differently going forward if we're going to have a single vendor, we may say that's a single vendor for $75,000 that council would approve, saying next year we approve $75,000. But as it approaches that limit of $50,000 on a single invoice, finance paying that gets that total, and HR putting those next invoices in, sees that total, then we can get in front of that and say, hey, we've spent 45,000, we need to go to council to up that because it's May, if that makes sense. And
Yes.
so that's a lot of what we have done in some of the other areas where we had repeated issues of going over that $50,000 limit. And a primary area is buying materials in public works, where we would have this pothole repair work going on, this overlay work going on over here. And so we had 4 or 5 projects pulling out money for asphalt. We were using the same vendor because they had a terrific price, but all of a sudden, when we got a purchasing manager in that understood what was going on, and she explained to us the importance of staying underneath that 50,000, we found ourselves going over it in public works on a number of different materials. So she worked with them to implement very similar processes to make sure that we're not doing that there. And we stumbled, we came across this one, and they are working hard to put steps in place to make sure that we don't repeat this error.
Thanks.
Mayor, if I may interject, I apologize, but I understand that some discussion regarding how we got here is necessary to the subject matter on the agenda. However, we seem to have stepped into a discussion about how the process works, and which is broader than the posted agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Zek.
Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor,
Sorry, where, Mr. Crawford?
could I have the floor for a second?
Sure.
I'd like to make a motion, and I do have one question. The question is, well, I think Mr. Zek made my question not appropriate, I'm sorry. I'd like to make a motion, we disapprove resolution number 17R38 until we can come up with the solutions and the processes to make sure things are okay and work in a better way.
Is there a second? Motion dies for lack of a second. Is there a motion to approve 17R38?
Wait.
Hold on. Hold on. Mr. Larson?
I just had some clarification questions because we kind of got deep in the weeds here, so I want to get my head straight. So according to the document we received, this money has already been budgeted for the year. We're not asking for additional budget funds. We're only asking for additional approval for a specific contract. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And then are there currently other agreements with other staffing agencies that had VIP staffing not been the staffing of choice, we wouldn't even be in this situation? It just so happens VIP staffing is preferred by many departments, and so it was overutilized. Is that correct?
That is correct. We also have a contract with Express Personnel. They have locations in both San Antonio and New Braunfels.
And so I guess the final clarification is if this resolution were not to be approved, then the funds would still be budgeted, would still be expended. It would just need to be done with another firm that we are less confident with. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, they would be spent with a different firm.
Okay.
They are budgeted and available for use.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Edwards?
Mr. Mayor, I'm going to make a feeble attempt at making an motion here. It's going to be an amended motion. Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we approve Resolution 17R38 with the limit not to exceed $65,000.
Second.
I have a motion, a second. Other comments and questions from council?
Mr. Mayor, I would love to have, Mr. Mayor, I would love to have us come back and review this, not this particular issue, but we need to really get a grip on where we're spending money and what we're doing, because we really need to know this cannot happen. This is
Mr.
taxpayer
Edwards.
money.
Mr. Edwards.
Hold
is
on.
that-
Do not interrupt another council member when they're speaking, okay? That's one of the clearest parts of our rules. I will recognize you as soon as he finishes.
That will give us time. The amount that I put to not exceed will give us additional time, but we need to see something on this rather quickly, either
We're
next
moving
meeting.
off again into area that our city attorney has advised us we shouldn't be in. So when we get to the end of the meeting, when we have items that we would like to request to be put on a future agenda, we'll address that then, and we'll take it up probably in a future meeting. Mr. Crawford, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I think you just answered my question, Mr. Mayor.
Very good. Anyone else? I do have a motion and a second. I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 No. Aye.
Aye.
6 ayes and 1 nay. The motion carries, and that is the first reading,
Thank you.
if I'm correct. So we'll take that up again in a second reading at a later time.
That's-
I'm sorry, that's a
that was a
resolution. So it is 6-1 and so ordered. Item number 6 is Resolution 17R39, a resolution by the City Council authorizing the city manager to accept the Rhine Valley Park as city property.
Yes. Good evening.
Van Zant, Ms. Schrum?
Yes. Yes,
Good
sir.
evening.
What we're talking about this evening, coming before Mayor and Council, is the Rhine Valley Park development, as you all know. It's South Schertz. It's over there located behind the Corbett Junior.
We can't hear you. Can you get to the mic?
Sorry. I'm usually too loud. Yeah, excuse me. Located behind Corbett Junior High School. And this was a multi-phase project where the developer did the park development in the phases as he was doing the development of the area itself. And it has some very nice amenities. It makes it's about 5 contiguous acres. It's bisected by a very gentle drainage swale. It has a parking lot, a small gazebo, some barbecue pits. It's ADA accessible. It has a nice playscape. It has a multi-use court, a couple of junior soccer fields, some nice trees, some nice landscaping, and staff feels very confident this would be a wonderful addition to our parks inventory. And so that's why we're coming to you all this evening by way of a resolution to get permission from you all to allow the city manager to enter into a warranty deed with the developer, and so we can acquire it as city property and park property.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Questions for Mr. Van Zant? Appears that there are none. Is there a motion to approve Resolution 17R39?
So move.
Second.
A motion from Mr. Thompson, a second from Mr. Edwards, I believe. Any other comments or questions from council? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 7 ayes and no nays. The motion carries and is so ordered.
Thank you.
Item number 7 this evening is Ordinance 17M19, an ordinance of the City Council of Schertz, Texas, prohibiting violations of the city charter. And I believe we have Mr. Zek to walk us through some changes that were made to this ordinance.
Oops. So pardon me while I pull it up on my. Generally, we had previously adopted an ordinance as required by our charter that, well, first let me back up. There is a provision in our charter that makes violations of the charter criminal conduct. The charter also requires that City Council adopt an ordinance criminalizing, and I hate to use that word, but that's in effect what you're doing, criminalizing the violation of those prohibitions. I had previously, immediately after the charter was adopted, drafted an ordinance which we placed on the books. After having done some work for another client, specifically as an expert witness on some issues that had some testimony about criminal conduct, it gave me pause to look into exactly how that was drafted. And it gave me concern that it wasn't drafted in a way that gave enough notice to the individual exactly what conduct was being criminalized. And so I redrafted the ordinance to make clear specifically what prohibitions within the charter are being criminalized. And so I listed those out specifically as they're listed within our charter, so it's now in ordinance form and in the ordinance. And in addition, previously we had just adopted an ordinance but not codified it, and I believed it would be appropriate for us to also codify it. So I did both of those things with the drafting of this ordinance, and it's consistent with the charter.
Thank you, sir. Anyone have any questions for Mr. Zek on this one? Mr. Crawford?
Sir, thank you. Mr. Zek,
Yes, sir.
not being an attorney, but looking at what the recitals are in the ordinance 17M19 versus what's stated in our charter, a couple of sentences have been left out, in my opinion. Could we make sure that the charter words are used in this ordinance? exactly as it's stated in the charter?
So I don't have a copy of it in front of me. I'm happy to go over it with you right now, actually, if someone could provide me a copy to make sure we have it consistent with the way you'd like it to read.
Yeah.
It's not, it didn't come up on the website as part of the agenda package. I apologize. No, the actual ordinance, do we have the ordinance, right, as well? Okay, very good. So where specifically, sir, are we?
I'll walk through and you can help me stay on track since you wrote the ordinance. Under Section 1, it talks about what the violations are, and they're going to add Section 50-7 for violations of city charter. The following acts, number A, the following acts are specifically prohibited. Number 1, holding other office. In the city charter, it appears to me that that Part A in the city charter is the same as item number 1A, or A number 1. The second one, appointments and removals, is short a sentence or so. So I'd like to have item under the city charter section 4.07 prohibitions, item number B should be the words that are used on the ordinance A.2.
Yeah, sure. Let's look at it, because I did change some of the wording, because if you were to use the verbatim words, it wouldn't make sense in the context
Okay.
of an ordinance. So let's look at it specifically, because I'm happy to make any change necessary so that's prohibition. Where's it at? Okay. Holding other office. No mayor or council member shall hold any compensated city officer employment into 2 years after the expiration of the term for which he or she was elected to city council. No mayor or council member shall hold any compensated city officer employment into 2 years after the expiration of the term for which he or she was. That's the exact same language out of the charter.
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay.
Yeah. The next one, item number 2 on the ordinance, appointments and removals, it's item number B in the prohibitions on the city charter.
Neither the city council nor any of its members shall in any manner dictate the appointment or removal of any city administrative officer or employee whom the city manager or any of his subordinates are empowered to appoint unless otherwise provided in this charter. But the city council may express its views and fully and freely discuss with the city manager anything pertaining to appointment or removal of such officers or employees. Appointments, removals. Neither city council nor any of its members shall in any way dictate the appointment or removal of any city administrative officer or employees who are subject to the direction. So you'd like to add the last 2 sentences?
Yes, sir, and
Okay.
if it's not appropriate, I'm looking for the clarification because
I don't have any problem with it. The reason it's not included is because that's not part of the prohibition. So that's why I didn't include it.
how do we denote an explanation of what's in the charter then?
Yeah, I'm happy to include it. It's not necessary, but I'm happy to do so, if you'd like it.
My problem is I don't know if we vote for this and we're sort of compelled to, I'm going to presume, and I can get in trouble that way, that the city charter would be the overriding factor for what the ordinance can do. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. But it doesn't hurt to have the detail if that's not an objection to you.
I have no objection to it. It's up to city council if they'd like to include that language. I would draft it in a different way. I would just include language similar to what I did with oh, wait a minute. Actually, if you look at A, I did that. Yay, Charlie. Look at the below provision under Section A.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
Exception. The city council as a body at a properly called meeting may express its views and fully and freely discuss the city manager or anything pertaining. So I included that language as an exception to criminalized conduct. So that's it. It is included in there.
Okay, item number 3, the third one.
Smarter than I think I am sometimes.
Smarter than I am.
Well.
I think item C on the charter and item 3 are the same.
Interference with administration, except for the purposes of inquiries unless otherwise provided in this charter, city councilors members shall deal with city officers. Oh, wait. Yeah, that's right. Is that correct? No, we just did that.
Yeah.
So that is the same. Are you talking about D, admission of liability?
No, I was talking about 3. I think 3 is the same on
Yes,
the
it appears to be, yes, sir.
And the next one would be admission of liability. I think that's the same.
D, admission of liability. It appears to be the same. Is that accurate? Yes. Neither the city council nor any of its members shall accept or admit liability or pay any claim for damages asserted against the city without first obtaining a written opinion from the city attorney regarding the city's liabilities therein. It's the same? Yes, sir.
I think item number 5 on the ordinance is the same as item number E in the city charter.
Okay, rather than read it, and I'll take your word for it?
Well, you're welcome to look at it.
No, sir.
Item number 6 on the ordinance and item number F on the city charter, attorney-client privilege, that is not the same. And I would like to, if you could explain and make sure I understand the attorney-client privilege that the council would have, and does that limit anything that I can, does that mess up with my?
Again, what I did is I included the language which is a specific prohibition. So if you look at F in the charter, it
Yes.
says, "It shall be unlawful for the mayor or council member to release any attorney-client privilege communication." That is the prohibited conduct, and it is the prohibited conduct that I included in the ordinance. The remainder of that provision is essentially a statement of who the privilege belongs to, but is not part of the prohibited conduct. So the part I did not include is the language, the second sentence, which says that the city council, as the governing body of the city, solely holds and is entitled to the attorney-client privilege, and it may only be waived by affirmative vote of 2/3 of the city council. It would not be appropriate to include that language in.
Doesn't need to be there.
That's correct.
But it still is it's an explanatory note.
It is not an explanatory note to the prohibited conduct. It is a separate provision which explains the only way that the attorney-client privilege may be waived. It is separate and apart from the prohibited conduct.
In that piece, the attorney-client privilege, how does that affect the council members?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Explain to me the attorney-client privilege. If I tell you something as a council member in a private session and with regard to city business, I mean, that we would have the discussion, then you can't tell the other council members what I said. Is that
No,
correct?
that's not what it means at
What it
all.
means.
As a matter of fact, I take the opposite approach with all of my clients, and I tell, and in case you haven't heard yet, I'll tell everybody now.
Okay.
If you tell me something in private, I won't go blab it to anybody, but if another council member asks me what was told to me, I will tell them because they are my client. However, the attorney-client privilege means that if you're to tell me something in private with respect to the business of the city, and the city is sued, and I'm put on the witness stand to testify as to that conversation, the city council can invoke that privilege so that I cannot testify as to our private conversation. And the only way that that privilege can be revoked pursuant to the charter is if city council at a properly posted meeting by a 2/3 vote waives the privilege. For the record, I don't keep secrets between council members. It's not.
Now I didn't understand it quite that way. If you tell the council something, that's not the same kind of privilege, right?
It is. It's the exact same privilege. It's you're speaking to me or me speaking to
Okay.
you in the context of me providing legal services.
So it's a two-way street then between council members and you and council members.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Anyone else? Mr. Davis?
Please bear with me because I have to jump back and forth between items on my iPad. Question, Mr. Zach.
Yes, sir.
When we wrote the amendments for the city charter back in 2015, the prohibitions or the enforcement part, again, with the understanding that our city charter prior to 2015 had no penalty clause, which means if somebody was not compliant or disregarded the charter, there was really nothing to do. We added the penalty clause, which resolved that.
Yes, sir.
And that was
partially resolved it.
partially resolved. Well, because it required the ordinance to go with it.
That's correct.
The penalty clause in section 1207 talks about the civil and the penalty and the criminal penalty and the civil penalty. And both those paragraphs specifically say any person who or by, on the criminal penalty one, any person who or by himself or with others violates any provision of this charter shall, in addition to any other penalty, be guilty of a misdemeanor and upon conviction thereof be punishable by a fine of not more than $500. City council shall enact an ordinance enforcing this section. The phrase in 1207 says any provision of this charter. So does that not extend beyond the material that is listed in section 4, I believe it is, under the city council?
Under section 4 of the city.
Because everything in the ordinance that we're proposing tonight is referencing the prohibitions in section 4.07, which comes under the heading of the city council. But 1207 says that any person violating any provision of the charter is subject to a criminal penalty. So I guess my question is we have other parts of the city council, or I mean of the city charter, and you specifically mentioned under 407 that in 407F, attorney-client privilege, it says it shall be unlawful. And in 407E, under conflicts of interest, it says it is hereby prohibited. And those are the only two that I've seen in there that use the word in those specific paragraphs of prohibited or unlawful. They're under the heading of prohibitions under section 407 for the city council. But I guess my question is, if there are other parts of the city charter that someone is not compliant with, would they also not be considered something that could face a criminal penalty? For example, if there's a section in the election portion that says how we do elections, and the city secretary did not comply with that portion of the city charter, would the city secretary not also be subject to a criminal penalty or civil penalty under 1207?
If you decide as a city council, because y'all are the folks that get to interpret this and make the decisions on those issues, that indeed that's a provision that you believe should be criminalized, then absolutely you could do that. I didn't get that to be the intent from the Charter Commission when we went through this process, but if you choose to do it that way, certainly you could. The way the criminal penalty provision is drafted, if you choose to, for example, it says, if you look at section 4.09, the city council shall meet at least once a month at a time and place prescribed by ordinance. Should city council decide not to meet to do that and violate that provision, if you'd like to make that a crime so that every single council member could be tried and convicted on it, feel free to do so. It's up to you, completely and totally.
See, my concern, I mean, we passed an ordinance. We're considering revising our ordinance, which basically sets the penalty levels of a misdemeanor and a $500 fine. And we set that in general terms against section 1207, which required the ordinance. And in retrospect, it seems as though this is another maybe potential gap that exists now in our revised city charter. The reason why I say that is now we're looking at a revised ordinance that, for a lack of better terminology, is cherry-picking specific things out of a 20-some page city charter and saying, if you do this one, it's a Class A misdemeanor. But in the wording of the city charter, it could apply to, like you mentioned, many other things. It could apply to actions not taken by the city manager, actions not taken by the city secretary, or actions taken or not taken by the city council. So I guess my concern is we pick 5 or 6 and saying we're concerned about this. I think before we just consider an ordinance and look at these 6, I think a broader discussion of what else in the city charter might be proper to include in this, or as an alternative measure to changing our ordinance with just a few items on it. Maybe the other alternative would be to look at a charter amendment to clarify 1207 a little bit further, specifically in the charter. Because again, on our proposal tonight, we've got item 2 that has an exception, but that exception does not exist in our city charter. So if someone were to face a charge under item 2A or item 2, or we look at the exception that's listed in the ordinance, does that not get trumped by the existing wording in the city charter?
Yeah. So say it again. I'm sorry.
We have a clear, so I got to jump back and forth here. We've got in our, let's see, city council meetings, in item 2A, we talk about appointments and removals, and then we insert an exception.
Yes, sir.
If we insert an exception into the ordinance, does that trump the wording of the city charter?
The charter has the same exception.
Let me double check that one. You would think electronic versions of all this stuff would be a lot easier.
And to be clear, when I drafted this, I used the power of my memory, which admittedly at my age may not be as good as it used to be, but my recollection from the Charter Commission discussions was that how do we enforce these specific that are listed as specific prohibitions, specifically that are prohibited? How do we enforce those? That was the discussion. And so we said, well, you can create a criminal penalty and you would have to adopt an ordinance to make those criminal, because municipal courts don't have jurisdiction over a charter, so you have to adopt an ordinance. And so as a result, I wasn't cherry picking. I was simply going to the part of the charter that said specifically these things are prohibited, which I interpreted to be a violation of the charter. And so I didn't cherry pick. I want to make clear the title of the section that I took all this from is very specific: prohibitions. And so I took that to mean these are the things that we are criminalizing, these things that are prohibited. And I took that language and created the ordinance.
Enough. Further? All right. Hold on. Just anyone else before Mr. Crawford?
Mr. Zach?
Yes, sir.
I know we talked about this on the Charter Review Committee, and I'm not trying to dispute with you anything, but I thought there were several occasions when we brought up the subject about penalties and having to put things in the charter to take care of the legal side of things that were not put in there. It could have been you giving examples, and I've confused the facts, but I don't remember talking about Section 12, but prohibitions in 4.7. We did talk about that. That wasn't a question, but I thought we talked about it in another place or two, but I can't put my finger on it.
It certainly is possible, but my recollection was that if we want it, that it is the specific prohibitions that we did charter that we were intending to criminalize.
Yeah.
And if I missed some specific prohibitions through the charter, I apologize. That's the reason why we go through this process, and we can include them. But those are the only ones I found in our charter that stated in the charter these are specifically prohibited. There are mandates, and I see mandates different than I see prohibitions which are specifically spelled out within the charter. And mandates being you shall meet once a month. Mandates being the city secretary is responsible for doing the election. I see those as mandates and responsibilities, and failing to do so I don't see as the same as I see a specific section of the charter that says this conduct is specifically prohibited.
But if somebody doesn't do something that was mandated that they shall do, then
I did not. Oh, I'm sorry, sir. Go ahead. As I went through I do not remember during any discussions with the Charter Commission that it was their intent to criminalize activity which is simply intended to be a mandate. And if that was the case, I apologize, but I don't remember that.
I'm not trying to say it was.
Okay.
I'm just trying to say that I thought we talked about it in several cases, not meaning that it ended up being a prohibition.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Mr. Edwards?
I'm sorry. Wasn't done?
I recognize you. You have the floor, sir.
Sorry. 1207, Mr. Zek, I was looking at 1207, and I'm just wondering why on one thing it does not mention, where is it at here? It does not mention in the language here, 1207A, criminal penalty, any person who by himself or with others violate any or all parts of this provision. I notice in B it says, upon the affirmative vote of 2/3 of the city council.
Yes, sir.
Not B in A as well?
No, sir. So A is intended to be a criminal penalty prosecuted in municipal court. B is intended to be a civil penalty that is enforced by city council.
Charlie, can you give me an example of a criminal penalty, for instance? A criminal conduct, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so sure, let's just take a copy of the ordinance.
I see the ones listed in 4.
Yeah, let's say that a city council member goes to the newspaper and says that the city is liable for the conduct of X in a newspaper article. We are liable for that, and we're going to have to pay it. And they did not first get an opinion from the city attorney, right? If that was proved and someone went to court, filed charges against the council member who did that, that council member would then be entitled to a trial by jury. They would, just like anything else, and if found guilty, they would be subject to a fine up to $500.
Okay.
And if no one brought charges against them, or even if someone did bring charges against them, city council could, on its own, put the issue on an agenda and have a discussion regarding whether or not they believed that it was a violation. And if they decided that it was, upon affirmative vote of 2/3 of the council, impose a fine of up to $500 against that council person.
As long as those statements are actual and factual.
Sure. I mean, anything you'd have to prove, and
Right.
to the satisfaction, in the civil context, by preponderance of the evidence, and in the criminal context, beyond a reasonable doubt.
Okay. That's what I needed. Thank you.
Mr. Davis?
I'm certainly okay with clarifying this issue. And again, having spent many nights going over the charter,
Yes, sir.
I don't think the Charter Review Commission really looked at it that way, as far as, because the wording of both paragraphs, whether it's a civil or a criminal, are essentially the same. If you violate any provision of the city charter, it could be one or the other. And I can certainly see the need to fill in the blanks. My concern is before, I would think that before we take action on a specific ordinance to make specific provisions, that are we going to re-engage on this at some point to decide what is a civil penalty? What is a violation of the city charter that is a civil penalty that results in a $500 fine from the council? And then the other part about it is I can understand looking at the 6 provisions that are under prohibitions, where some of them would certainly appear to be warranted of a misdemeanor criminal charge, such as a conflict of interest, which is a violation of the Texas Code. I'm not necessarily convinced that holding another office 2 years after you leave, if somebody inadvertently or intentionally accepts a compensated position a year and a half after they leave the city council, does that necessarily relegate itself to a misdemeanor charge versus a civil penalty or and a termination of their position for noncompliance. Again, I can certainly understand the need to maybe clarify the disconnects between the broad nature of 1207 with regards to the entire city charter. But if we're going to do that, I would rather, like we did with the city charter, go back and look through the whole charter and find out which pieces apply to which part of the civil and which pieces apply to the criminal part, regardless of whether they come under the specific prohibition section in 407 or some other part of the city charter, because there are other parts of the city charter that are serious enough, I would think, that if that officer of the city failed to do that, it might warrant a misdemeanor charge.
I think that's a good discussion for y'all to have, but I would be wary of criminalizing conduct of employees, for example. I'm not sure criminalizing and prosecuting your city secretary because she negligently failed to do something required by the charter. If you go through that discussion, I would really, really consider whether or not that's something that you want to do. But I think it's a good discussion to have, certainly. It's up to you. You are the lucky folks that get to make these decisions, and I'm happy to advise along the way.
All right, a little bit of history. When I was first elected to city council, there were multitudinous things that the city council and others did not do that were required by the charter, mandated by the charter. There were not violations of the prohibitions, that I can recall, but there were numerous mandates that were not followed. And in fact, God rest his soul, Tony Willenchick is the one that called us out on a number of those things and said, the charter, have y'all read the charter? I'm summarizing his commentary, because it actually says we're supposed to be doing this, 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 and this, and we're not doing it. And yet the government, as it were, ran rather efficiently and productively. So I'm going to kind of lean toward the explanation given to us by our city attorney. The prohibitions have a clear connotation. That's prohibited action. You cannot do that. That is a negative statement, right? You must not. You cannot do that. Mandates are you must do this. And I've got to say that the idea of making a mandate, you must do this, somehow criminalized or attached to it a civil penalty, to me does not at all seem in the spirit of the charter. The charter, and it's important to go back and look at our history. In 1973, you had a situation where we were a general law city, and the mayor attempted to veto an item that was passed by council. Part of the reaction to that was a question of whether or not that could be done. And following on that action and many other things that happened at that time, the decision was made for us to become a home rule city and to write a home rule charter that would instruct the government as to how to act and perform. So that is the genesis, if you will, of where this particular document comes from, and it's been looked at and touched and changed and modified many times since 1974. And I do not see, having looked back at most of the minutes of the city and looked back at previous charters and their revisions, I don't see that it is in the spirit of the charter to criminalize or make it a civil penalty to fail to perform the mandates of the charter. I think instead what it does is it says these are the things that you must do. And if the citizens see that you're not doing them, they're going to kick your butt out of office. And that's correct. Making it civil or criminal to fail to do those things, I think, is not in the spirit of the charter. Making it civil or criminal to violate the prohibitions may well be within the spirit of the charter. I certainly have no objection to that. But I would really hesitate to broaden beyond the prohibitions those things which we say are criminal acts or civil violations. I can't bring myself to bridge that gap. I certainly side with the Charter Commission and with the will of the council to follow the charter and assign the $500 penalties for acting in a manner that violates the prohibitions. I'm right there with you on that one. I'm not sure I can follow the rest. I do think, to Mr. Davis's point, that 1207 standing on its own is problematic. And I do think we probably should have a discussion in the future, not at this time, and talk about whether or not we need to change that language. And we don't need a charter review commission to do that. The council can do that in of its own accord, and we can do so on the 2017 November ballot. So it's probably timely that we take that up shortly, but not at this time. With that, I'll stop, and I'll recognize Mr. Thompson, and then maybe we can dispose of this matter. Mr. Thompson.
Make a motion that we approve ordinance number 17-M-19.
Second.
I have a motion from Mr. Thompson, a second from Mr. Davis, I believe. My head was turned the other way. Any other comments or questions from council? Not, I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 7 ayes and no nays. The motion carries. That was first reading. We'll take it up again later. All right, we have already disposed of items 8, 9, and 10. Item number 11, which is a future item placement on a council agenda. I've been advised by our attorney that it would be untimely to take this up at this time. I would ask the council to heed his advice unless there's some significant disagreement.
With regards to any item for the future?
At this time. Hey, what we can do, why don't we see if we can put, and Mr. Zeck, you can tell me if I get this correct, why don't we have an executive session scheduled where you can enumerate on why that is the case for our next meeting, if that
Certainly.
makes sense.
I can actually, if you want to, we can go into closed session. I can give you my legal advice on this issue right now if you choose, or we can put it on a future agenda. It's up to you.
Point of order. Is this about putting any item on the future agenda?
This is at this time, right now, this subject matter.
Oh, no, I have something different, not that one.
No, this is actually item number 11, where we were going to discuss the request that was made, and there was an objection made to that request, and therefore procedurally, we bring this forward as it is here. When the city attorney saw that it was brought on to this agenda, he suggested that now is not the time to take this up in this form.
To clarify,
On
there's
this item.
Agenda item number 14 is your general agenda item for placing the future things on the agenda. This was a specific requested item by a council member.
Got it. No, I'm sorry. I have something for item 14.
We'll get to it shortly. No objection on number 11? All right, very good. Let's move on. The next item that we have on the agenda is a roll call vote confirmation. Mrs. Dennis?
Yes, so what I'm going to do is, I'm not going to do it in the order that it was presented, but I'll do it.
Indeed. I jumped around a little bit. I apologize. I want to do so.
Okay, for the workshop item regarding No Name Park, a motion was made by Mayor Carpenter, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Edwards, that requests the Parks Board to name the No Name Park Earl Sawyer Park.
Correction, Mr. Mayor? That's a correction. It should
Yes.
be to consider.
To consider naming that's hard to say. To consider
Naming No Name
No
Park.
Name Park Earl
Sawyer Park, yes. We just we'd like the Parks Board to take that under advisement and consideration.
Thank you. Apologize. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards, Council Members Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Thompson, Kaiser, Crawford voted yes, no, one voted no. Consent agenda items number 1 and 2. A motion was made by Mayor Pro Tem Edwards, seconded by Council Member Kaiser. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards, Council Members Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Thompson, Kaiser Crawford voted yes, no one voted no. Item number 3, resolution number 17R37. A motion was made by Councilmember Davis, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Edwards. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards, Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Thompson, Kaiser, Crawford voted yes, no one voted no. Item number 4, ordinance number 17T22. A motion was made by Councilmember Davis to disapprove the ordinance, seconded by Councilmember Kaiser. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards, Councilmembers Davis, Kaiser, and Crawford voted yes. Councilmembers Gutierrez, Larson, and Thompson voted no. Motion passed. Item number Item number 5, resolution number 17R38. A motion was made by Mayor Pro Tem Edwards to not exceed $65,000, seconded by Councilmember Larson. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards, Councilmembers Gutierrez, Larson, Thompson, Kaiser, Crawford voted yes. Councilmember Davis voted no. Motion passed. Item number 6, resolution number 17R39. Motion was made by Councilmember Thompson, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Edwards. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards, Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Thompson, Kaiser, Crawford voted yes. No one voted no. Motion passed. Item number 7, ordinance number 17M19 on first reading. Motion was made by Councilmember Thompson, seconded by Councilmember Davis. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards, Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Thompson, Kaiser, Crawford voted yes. No one voted no. Motion passed. Item number 8, resolution number 17R34. Motion was made by Mayor Pro Tem Edwards, seconded by Councilmember Thompson. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards, Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Thompson, Kaiser, Crawford voted yes. No one voted no. Motion passed. Item number 9, resolution number 17R35. Motion was made by Mayor Pro Tem Edwards, seconded by Councilmember Gutierrez. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards, Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Thompson, Kaiser, Crawford voted yes. No one voted no. Motion passed. Item number 10, resolution number 17R36. A motion was made by Mayor Pro Tem Edwards, seconded by Councilmember Thompson. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards, Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Thompson, Kaiser, Crawford voted yes. No one voted no. Motion passed.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it. The council does have a need to go into a closed session this evening. The City Council will meet in closed session under Section 551.087 of the Texas Government Code, deliberation regarding economic development negotiations, closed meeting. In regard to Project E-030 and Project E-031, we're going to have a brief recess here if council doesn't object for 10 minutes, and we will convene in an executive session at 9:25, and we are now at recess from our open session. All right, I've got approximately, well, let's not be approximate. I show 10:31. We'll go back into open session. Next item is 12A, taking any action based on discussions held in the closed session under agenda item 12. I don't believe there's any action to be taken this evening. The next item that we have is requests and announcements, and first we have announcements by the city manager. Mr. Kessel, nothing this evening. Very good. Item 14, placing items on a future agenda. Mr. Davis, I think you said you had something you'd like to bring up.
Yes, sir. I had the pleasure of attending the Housing Authority meeting last night, and one of the agenda items that they had was the potential to participate in a lawsuit against HUD that stems back to 2012 and the appropriations in 2012. They were notified by, and I don't want to make sure I get their title right, the Public Housing Authorities Directors Association, that an initial lawsuit against HUD by various housing agencies was successful in federal claims court to the tune that 309 housing authority plaintiffs were awarded a total of $135 million. They were notified that our housing authority was among a large number of housing authorities who would have been entitled to money damages if they had joined the lawsuit. The total money, according to the letter here, the total amount of money damages for you and other housing authorities that did not participate in the lawsuit is estimated to be over $230 million. All of this money will be lost if a second lawsuit is not filed before November 18th, 2017, which is the end of the 6-year statute of limitations for a period of filing breach of contract lawsuit against the United States. It goes on to say that based on the previous award from the first lawsuit, the second lawsuit, if the trend continues, the housing authority could be eligible for up to approximately $58,000 in money that they did not receive in 2012 on that breach of contract lawsuit. The issue for the housing authority is for them to participate in the second proposed lawsuit, they have a fee that would be equivalent to $1,000, which includes the $400 filing fee for the claims court for each plaintiff. And it goes on to say that the money used to pay for the legal fees must come from non-federal funds, which unfortunately the housing authority does not have. So the question that I'd like to have on the agenda, and I'll give a copy of this letter to council or to the city secretary to send to the council members and to the city attorney, would be a discussion as to whether or not the city could fund that participation in the lawsuit. It's one of those things where, again, the first phase was successful for the plaintiffs, and unless the government appeals, it looks like it could be potentially favorable for our housing authority in the second phase, and again, they could ultimately turn their $1,000 fee into the $58,000 that they were denied back in 2012.
Okay, well, let's put that on an agenda for our next meeting, and we'll get copies to the city secretary, the city attorney, and the council as part of that posting. Thank you for bringing that to us and for being on that, involved with that entity. It's good stuff. Anyone else?
Mr. Mayor, we talked about item number 17, R38. If you could just give us an update on the consolidation of a contract for staffing services so that to ensure that there's no miscommunication in the future.
And Mr. James says he'll take care of that for us.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Mr. Thompson?
In light of tonight's discussion, I'd like to put on a future agenda item, Charter 1207, so that we can clarify that in light of earlier discussion.
So a general item, then, I would ask that we have on for discussion of the city charter. And if there are anything outside of Section 12, we can address that too. Okay, very good.
Ms. Kaiser first? Dr. Kaiser first, or is it my turn? Could we get a short update on the animal shelter repairs and maintenance that's been done over the last 6 months or so? Nothing
Sure.
takes 30 minutes.
The
It's something
HVAC and all that? Yeah.
Just an update, nothing more sinister than that.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, in that case, we'll go to item number 15, announcements by the mayor and council members. We'll start with Mayor Pro Tem Edwards.
Mr. Mayor, I will be absent on the 27th, taking my daughter to the Naval Academy.
Good for you. Congratulations again. Anything else? Mr. Crawford?
Nothing.
Davis?
Nothing, sir.
Mr. Gutierrez?
Nothing, sir.
Mr. Larson? Nothing. Mr. Thompson?
No, sir.
Dr. Kaiser?
I don't have anything.
If nothing else from council or staff, we stand adjourned. You met Mayor Nirenberg today?
Oh, yeah, he was at the Plains and Train.
Oh, cool. He was kind enough to answer my congratulatory text to him at 12:10 in the morning on the election.